Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into the kind of cold that stiffens your breath before you even see it. You're standing on the shore of a fjord somewhere around the 9th century, and the air tastes of iron, salt, and the promise of storms. The sea is black glass, the stars a million pinpricks of cruel beauty. You can hear the hollow knock of oars against a longship's hull, and the low, joking growl of men pretending they're not freezing to death. You're about to climb aboard with them. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this night. Your soft, modern bones would beg for central heating within minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. You step across the gangplank. The ship sways. The frost crunches under your boots. Around you, Vikings move like silhouettes cut from smoke. They're wrapping ropes, tucking fur cloaks around their shoulders, stowing away shields that still smell of last week's battle. The night hums with the rhythm of quiet labor. This is the beginning of their rest, if you can call it that. The longship itself seems alive, breathing with every small wave. It's long and narrow, 40, maybe 50 men aboard. The planks are tarred and black, slick from sea spray. The carved dragon head at the prow stares ahead, blank-eyed, into the dark. You can almost feel it judging your clumsy balance. Beneath the benches where warriors sit to row, there's a cramped world of blankets, bundles, and sleeping bodies. Imagine spending months like this, with no privacy but a cloak drawn over your head. A faint orange glow flickers at the stern, an oil lamp in a bronze bowl. The flame trembles in the wind, throwing small shapes against the hull. The Vikings aren't reckless enough to light big fires on wooden ships. Not tonight. Not when one spark could turn their only refuge into a floating pyre. Still, they need light and a little warmth. The lamp gives both, barely. The rest they find in each other's body heat, in wool, fur, and stubbornness. You sit down beside a broad man who grins through frost-encrusted whiskers. His name maybe is Leif or Torstein, everyone. Seems to be named that here. He gestures for you to pull your cloak tight, then points to the horizon. There, the sky is moving. Sheets of green and violet ripple across the stars. The northern lights, silent and indifferent, dance above the frozen sea. Even the hardiest raider grows quiet watching them. The Vikings lived in rhythm with this raw beauty. Their winters were long, cruel, and strangely hypnotic. The sea often froze, trapping ships like insects in amber. Some crews spent the season ashore, pulling their vessels onto the ice and building turf shelters nearby. Others, the restless ones, stayed afloat, drifting between trading outposts, fishing grounds, or foreign coasts. When you're born to move, stillness feels like dying. You imagine them here, anchored in some lonely bay. The wind shrieks through the rigging. Ice clings to the sail's edge, forming glittering daggers. Below, men huddle under rough blankets made from wool and animal skins. The smell is dense: smoke, salt, tar, wet leather, and men who haven't bathed since the last summer's feast. You breathe it in, and weirdly, it comforts you. This is survival stripped to the bone. Historically, Viking longships were open-decked, no cozy cabins, no bulkheads to block the wind. Sleeping on them in winter was an act of defiance against nature itself. Some historians argue they built temporary awnings of hide or canvas, strung from the mast and lashed down to keep off snow. Others insist that in the worst cold, they abandoned the sea entirely. The truth? No one knows for sure. The evidence is scattered. A few sagas hint at fires on board. Some archaeological finds show scorch marks on planks. The debate flickers like that lamp flame never fully extinguished. You lie back against a rolled-up sail, trying to imagine sleep here. The boards are damp and unyielding, the air thick with frost. Every creak sounds like a threat. But over time, your body would learn to adapt to steal warmth from the smallest corner, to doze in bursts between watch shifts. Viking sleep wasn't the luxury of 8 hours in one stretch. It came in fragments, timed to tides, storms, and raids. A mainstream fact: Viking sailors navigated by sunstone, that mysterious crystal said to reveal the sun's position even through clouds. Without such precision, they'd never have dared these long voyages. But here's a quirkier truth. They also carried ravens. Yes, actual ravens, released to find land when fog or night swallowed the horizon. If the bird didn't return, it meant land was near. You can picture one of them perched above you now, feathers ruffling in the icy air, watching over the men as they sleep. Your breath begins to slow. The sea murmurs against the hull, an ancient lullaby. The Vikings' world wasn't quiet, but it had its own peace, the peace of exhaustion. They slept wrapped in the same cloaks they'd fight and die in. Their dreams, maybe, were of green summers and bright halls, of home fires and mead. Or maybe they dreamed of nothing at all, too tired even for the gods. The cold presses closer, but you feel it less. The rhythmic slap of waves, the muffled snores, the rustle of furs, it's all merging into something steady, something almost kind. You glance once more at the lamp's trembling light. Beyond it, Leif or Thorstein has already drifted off, his beard crusted with frost, his hand still resting on the hilt of his axe. You close your eyes and follow him into that heavy, dreamless dark. Tomorrow, the sea will wake first. But for now, you float, halfway between life and legend, in the cradle of a Viking night. The longship rocks gently beneath you, each movement a reminder that the sea never truly rests. When you open your eyes, dawn hasn't come because in this part of the world, winter's dawn is a reluctant guest. The sky glows like old pewter, faint and bruised. You blink frost from your eyelashes and sit up, realizing just how little separates you from the ocean itself. Beneath the deck planks, the water whispers, only an arm's length away. This ship isn't just transport, it's home, fortress, and cradle all at once. You study it more closely, now that you're fully awake. The shape of the hull is like a drawn bow, long and elegant, shallow enough to glide up rivers, yet strong enough to handle open seas. The Vikings called their warships langskip longships, and they built them with a craftsman's poetry. Each plank overlapped the next in what we call clinker construction, held together by iron rivets that clink softly when the hull flexes. You can hear that sound now, a kind of heartbeat beneath the snoring crew. Every detail of this vessel serves two purposes: speed and survival. The benches where rowers sit by day become sleeping platforms by night. You run your fingers over the wood, it's worn smooth by sweat and time. Each man claims a narrow strip, perhaps 2 feet wide, his world contained between the curved ribs of the ship and the edge of his shield. No privacy, no soft pillows. Just you, your furs, your sword, and the endless dark. During summer voyages, sleeping here would have been almost comfortable. The night would have smelled of pine and seaweed instead of frozen salt. But winter changes everything. The benches grow slick with ice. The ropes freeze solid. To keep dry, Vikings used their own gear creatively. Sailcloth draped over the gunwales, oiled hides stretched across open sections, and woolen cloaks rolled tight around their necks. Imagine pulling your bedding from under your seat, shaking off the frost, and curling up in it while your boots stay on because taking them off might mean never getting them on again. Some historians believe the men built small windbreaks from shields, setting them upright along the ship's sides to block icy gusts. Others think they used barrels, crates, or even animal hides lashed to oars. There's no firm proof, just bits of writing, guesses carved from sagas and digs at old harbours. Scholars still argue whether longships were ever fully decked or always open, their planks constantly slick with sea spray. What is certain, though, is that a Viking's bunk was also his battle station. Sleep came where duty allowed, not where comfort invited. It's strange to think of a warship as home, but that's what it was. For months, sometimes years, these men lived afloat. They cooked, ate, and slept here. They repaired sails, traded stories, and carved runes into the very wood beneath your hand. If you look close enough, You might see faint lines, scratched initials, perhaps a rune for protection, or a crude image of a ship within a ship. The Vikings believed words had power, and carving a symbol could guard against misfortune. You can almost hear one of them murmuring a spell as his knife works by torchlight. The ship creaks, reminding you it's still alive. There's a rhythm to its sounds. The sigh of ropes, the hiss of shifting frost, the soft slap of water against the hull. It's hypnotic. You realize how this place reshapes the meaning of bedroom. No walls, no doors, just the curve of the boat and the curve of the sky. Even now, with the cold biting your cheeks, there's an intimacy to it. You're sleeping under the same stars that guided them across oceans. A mainstream fact, longships like this were marvels of design, far ahead of their time. Their flexible hulls allowed them to handle rough seas with grace, bending instead of breaking. That innovation made Viking raids possible across Europe, from the rivers of Russia to the coasts of North America. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some sagas claim the ships could be heard singing in rough weather. It wasn't poetry, the sound came from the planks rubbing together under strain. Imagine drifting off to sleep to that eerie music, half lullaby, half warning. You glance around at the others. The crew sleeps in loose clusters, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, bodies angled like spoons for warmth. Someone mutters in his dreams, perhaps calling out to a wife he won't see for years. Another man scratches at lice under his tunic, sighing heavily. You think of the small comforts missing from this world, a fire that doesn't smoke, a dry blanket, even silence. And yet, there's a calmness here, a sense that every creak and whisper is known, accepted, part of the rhythm of life. Somewhere near the bow, a man sits awake, sharpening his blade in slow, careful strokes. The rasp of metal on stone blends with the lull of the sea. He nods when he catches your eye, no words, just a silent acknowledgement that sleep is a luxury, not a right. The longship is always half awake, like an animal resting but ready to pounce. As you lie back again, you feel the curve of the hull cradle you. You understand, in a strange way, why they could call this home. The longship wasn't just transport, it was a shared heartbeat. It demanded everything but gave back identity, belonging, purpose. Each plank carried not only men, but stories, victories, and ghosts. When they sailed, they weren't individuals anymore. They were one body, one breath moving across the water. The sea moans softly under you. Someone stirs, pulling a fur tighter around his shoulders. You close your eyes, trying to match your breathing to the ship's gentle rhythm. The boards creak. The world sways. Slowly, the biting cold fades into the background, replaced by the steady pulse of wood and wave. The longship rocks you towards sleep, not comforted, exactly, but accepted. The ship has stopped rocking quite so hard, though you can still feel the heartbeat of the sea beneath your boots. Morning, if you can call this pale grey glow morning, seeps over the rim of the fjord. The crew stirs like bears leaving hibernation, stretching, groaning, shaking out cloaks stiffened by frost. You reach for your own blanket, tracing the weave between your fingers. It's coarse, but strangely comforting. Wool. That's what kept the Vikings alive. You might think of it as itchy and unremarkable, but here it's a miracle material. It traps heat even when wet, shrugs off wind, and smells faintly of lanolin grease from the sheep that once wore it. Archaeologists generally agree that every warrior aboard carried at least one thick woolen cloak, often layered with animal pelts: seal, bear, fox, reindeer, whatever the local hunt had offered. You can picture the deck now, transformed at night into a patchwork of hides, every man cocooned like some rugged caterpillar waiting for spring. You pull your cloak tighter. The fabric rasps softly against your neck. Vikings learned early that survival in northern winters wasn't about brute strength, it was about clever layering. Linen next to the skin to wick moisture, thick wool above that, and fur as the outer armor against cold. They weren't savages swinging axes in the snow. They were engineers of warmth. There's an old sailor's rumor that the best cloaks were made from the wool of black sheep, believed to hold more of the sun's strength. Others swore by wolf pelts, thinking the animal's spirit kept you fierce in your dreams. Strangely enough, some even lined their boots with dried grass, woven into little mats. The trick worked. Grass absorbed sweat, keeping frostbite away. You can imagine the soft crunch underfoot as you shift your weight, a whisper of summer trapped beneath your soles. You look around the deck. Steam rises from breathing bodies. One man kneels to check a bundle near his bench. It's his bedding roll, neatly tied with twine. Inside, you catch glimpses of fur sewn into a rough quilt. Not everyone owned the same materials. A wealthy jarl might sleep beneath a reindeer pelt, while a farmhand settled for sheepskin patched with old sailcloth. Life at sea, flattened class differences though. Once the frost set in, everyone shivered the same. The air carries the smell of salt and singed oil. Someone has lit a small lamp, its flame licking at the rim of a bronze cup. The warmth is tiny, but precious. You rub your hands near it, careful not to breathe too hard and snuff it out. Most evidence points to the idea that Vikings used these lamps sparingly. Too many open flames meant disaster on a wooden ship. Instead, they relied on the heat of their own company. You can feel it now, that dense, shared warmth that builds when bodies and breath gather close. It's easy to forget how tactile this world was. Every object had texture, the rough rope fibers under your palm, the slick fur of your hood, the gritty salt caked in your beard. You shift your cloak again and think about the hands that made it. Somewhere, months before this voyage, a woman sat by a smoky hearth, spinning wool into yarn, muttering to herself as the spindle danced. Maybe she was his mother, maybe his wife. Her work became his shelter now, stretched over his shoulders as the only barrier between him and the northern night. Some researchers claim that sleeping wrapped in fur carried spiritual meaning too. To the Norse mind, animals weren't just resources, they were partners. Wearing their skins meant sharing their strength. A bear's pelt lent courage. A wolf's hide brought endurance. Whether that's faith or superstition, who can say? The truth remains hazy even among experts, but when you feel the weight of fur around you, it's easy to believe a little of the animal lingers. You lie back, watching your breath rise in faint clouds. The cold gnaws, but the layers do their job. Each fabric, each pelt, traps warmth like memories pressed between pages. You start to drift, but a sound catches your ear, one of the men humming softly. It's not a song, just a low tone, rhythmic, calming. Maybe he's remembering his village, the smell of baking bread, the laughter from a longhouse feast. For now, though, this ship is his home, his bed, his everything. Interestingly, one unusual custom stood out among seafarers. They sometimes placed small bits of amber in their bedrolls. Not for luck, but for scent. Amber, when warmed by body heat, released a faint, resinous fragrance that masked the smell of wet wool and sweat. You breathe in, and perhaps you catch a ghost of that honeyed note amid the tar and brine. As the day limps forward, frost glitters on the shields stacked along the rail. A few flakes of snow begin to fall, quiet as ash. The Vikings don't rush to move. They stay bundled in their blankets, each man wrapped in his own little world of warmth and dreams. You realize that beneath all the tales of conquest and blood, their greatest daily victory was simply not freezing. You close your eyes again. The wool scratches your cheek, but gently now, like an old friend. The sea sighs. The crew murmurs in their sleep, and the longship rocks you once more into the fragile safety of warmth hard-earned. In this small cocoon of fur and faith, you feel the truth of their endurance, their genius, not in glory, but in staying alive. By evening the air has thickened again, colder, sharper, as if the world itself has drawn in a breath and forgotten how to exhale. You're still aboard the longship, your cloak pulled close, the water beneath you black as obsidian. The wind carries the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. Someone, somewhere, has lit a fire, but not here. not on this wooden beast that could turn to tinder with one careless spark. You've probably wondered how Vikings kept warm without burning their homes at sea. According to written sagas and ship remains, fire was both ally and enemy. The ships themselves were masterpieces of oak and pine, materials that floated beautifully but burned with enthusiasm. Most of the time, Vikings relied on small, contained flames, a simple oil lamp, a bowl carved from soapstone, or a lantern shielded by bits of horn. These little pockets of fire gave light more than heat, but in the black belly of the North Sea, that glow meant life. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over how often flames were used aboard. Some believe there were carefully placed hearths made of sand or clay tiles at the ship's center, surrounded by stones to trap warmth. Others doubt it entirely, claiming even a single gust could scatter embers into disaster. You can picture it, can't you? A lone crewman hunched over a flame, the wind teasing the edges of his beard, every muscle tense. The heat feels wonderful, but the fear of catching the deck on fire is never far away. A curious little detail you might not expect. The Vikings sometimes carried iron pans called eldfat, filled with glowing coals from a previous campfire. They treated those embers like treasure, covering them with ash to keep them alive during the voyage. When night fell, a warrior could lift the lid, blow gently, and coax fire back to life. It was portable warmth, a piece of home smuggled into the wild sea. You glance toward the stern where two men now crouch over one of those bowls. The faint orange light trembles between their faces, illuminating sharp cheekbones and ice-crusted eyebrows. They're talking quietly, their words blending with the whisper of the sea. One feeds the fire with a chip of driftwood, and the smell smoky, sweet cuts through the salt. You inch closer, greedy for the warmth that never seems to reach far enough. Most evidence points to the idea that when ships anchored for long rests, the crew sometimes built small fires on shore instead, hauling their cookpots and embers onto the beach. They'd turn the longship into a floating barracks while cooking over real flames nearby. On frozen nights, those fires must have glowed like little suns across the dark fjords. You can almost see it, lines of orange sparks dancing in the wind, laughter echoing through the frost, the hiss of meat roasting on skewers. It's easy to romanticize, but remember this was survival on a knife's edge. The smoke stung their eyes. The sparks burned holes in their cloaks. The warmth lasted only as long as the wood did, and wood was heavy. Sometimes they burned scraps of rope or splinters from broken oars. Everything became fuel in the end. The truth remains hazy even among experts about whether fires were allowed on long voyages. Some reconstructed ships, like those tested in Denmark, show scorch marks suggesting controlled hearths might have existed. Others remain spotless, implying strict bans. The contradiction lingers like the smell of smoke itself, always there, always shifting. You settle by the flickering bowl, your fingers tingling back to life. The light plays across the deck, tracing every knot in the planks, every scar in the men's hands. There's something hypnotic about it. Fire is both ancient and intimate. It binds people together. You think about how these warriors must have felt, staring into flames after a day of rowing through sleet. In the glow, their faces soften. They're not raiders or legends, just tired humans chasing warmth. Interestingly, one unusual custom appeared in some Norse regions. When the fire's coals began to die, sailors would spit into the embers before snuffing them out. It wasn't disrespect, it was a sign of gratitude, an offering of breath to thank the flame for its service. You watch now as one man leans forward and does just that, a soft hiss rising as his saliva meets the glowing ash. The others nod, satisfied. As the light fades, the world seems to shrink to the size of this small circle of heat. Beyond it, the dark stretches endless and absolute. You pull your fur tighter, aware of how fragile the boundary is between comfort and chaos. One spark too many, one careless hand, and this floating miracle of wood and will could vanish in an inferno. It's a balance the Vikings lived with constantly, a quiet truce between warmth and destruction. The lamp sputters once, twice, then steadies. Around you, the crew begins to settle. Some hum softly. Others murmur short prayers to Thor or Njord, asking that the winds stay kind. You close your eyes, the red glow painting your eyelids, and listen to the sighs of men easing toward uneasy sleep. The ship creaks, the fire pops, and the sea whispers through the gaps in the planks. It's strange, but you start to feel safe in this fragile circle of light. Fire and sea, two opposites holding hands for a night. And as the cold closes in again, you realize that sometimes survival is nothing more than daring to keep a spark alive on a ship made of dreams. Night folds back over the longship like a heavy cloak, and with it comes a strange sense of intimacy. The sea is calmer now, a slow-breathing creature beneath you. The men begin to settle in, drawing close under their furs and cloaks, shoulders brushing, laughter softening into murmurs. You realize that here, sleeping is not just rest, it's strategy. Warmth is a shared resource, and trust is the only blanket big enough for everyone. It's well established in Norse history that Viking crews slept in pairs or small clusters to conserve heat. The cold didn't care about pride. Even fierce warriors had to press together, sometimes back to back, sometimes chest to chest. The closeness was practical, not sentimental, though bonds formed in those frozen nights often ran deeper than blood. You can imagine the quiet jokes, the rhythmic breathing, the occasional elbow when someone rolled too far. One curious story tucked in the sagas tells of a crew so tightly knit that their leader, Halfdan, insisted they all sleep touching at least one other person's shoulder so no man drifts alone into hell's cold halls. It sounds poetic, but maybe it was also superstition, the belief that body heat wasn't just physical warmth, but a protection for the soul. When the darkness stretched for months, any ritual could become faith. As you watch them now, the crew moves like a single organism preparing for hibernation. Bedrolls unfurl across the benches. Shields, earlier hung along the rails, are propped to block the wind. The men shuffle closer, forming loose chains of warmth. The air hums with low voices, half teasing, half prayer. Someone mutters about the frost that crept into his boots last night. Another replies with a joke that earns a few sleepy chuckles. You find yourself smiling, though your jaw feels stiff from cold. There's a quiet dignity in this shared surrender. These are men trained to fight, raid, and kill, yet here they lie vulnerable, tangled in the same furs, breathing the same stale air. It's the kind of closeness that only hardship can forge, bonds of survival. When daylight comes, and it will, eventually these same men will row, fight, and bleed for one another. But for now, their loyalty is expressed in the simple act of keeping each other warm. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking crews developed remarkable teamwork not just in battle, but in how they lived. The longship demanded cooperation. Every oar stroke had to match the others. Every repair required multiple hands. Even in sleep, they learned synchronization, the rhythm of shared exhaustion. It's no wonder that their sagas speak so often of brotherhood, a word that meant more than family. A small but surprising truth from Norse accounts. Some crews, when far from home, made symbolic pacts before sleeping. They would clasp hands, then rest their joined fists under their heads, a gesture meant to ensure no betrayal could reach them in dreams. You picture it now. Rough palms pressed together, calloused fingers gripping tight, a silent promise carried into slumber. You shift slightly and hear the creak of the planks beneath. One man beside you snores softly, a deep rumbling sound that might be comforting if it weren't so close to your ear. Another turns in his sleep, muttering words that sound like fragments of prayer or nonsense. The air smells of wool and salt and human fatigue. Yet somehow, it feels safe, like the world has shrunk to the size of this small, swaying cabin without walls. No one has quite settled the matter of how these men dealt with nightmares. The sagas mention dreams, often visions of omens, warnings from gods, or messages from the dead. Some scholars suggest they saw dreams as glimpses into another realm, a place where the spirit could wander while the body rested. Perhaps that's why they stayed close, to keep each other's wandering souls from drifting too far. You can almost feel it, that thin thread between dream and wakefulness. The longship rocks gently. The sound of the sea fills your ears. Someone coughs. Someone sighs. The rhythm of shared breathing becomes its own kind of lullaby. Even you start to drift, though the cold still nips at your fingertips. Imagine this: 50 men asleep side by side, their weapons within reach, their faces softened by exhaustion. Above them, the stars burn white against the dark sky, reflected in the glassy water below. The ship is still, save for the faint creak of ropes. It feels timeless, almost sacred. The noise of the living world fades until there's only the sound of existence itself, the slow pulse of life refusing to surrender to the cold. You close your eyes and breathe in the mingled scents of fur, sweat, and sea. In this cramped space, warmth is not just comfort, it's communion. The Vikings may have conquered half the known world, but in moments like these, their greatest act of courage was simply learning to sleep together beneath the breath of winter. The longship glides through the night again, rocking softly as though it's humming to itself. Around you, the men lie still, but the world never falls silent. It never truly does at sea. You pull the edge of your cloak higher over your ears, though even that can't keep out the orchestra that surrounds you. The soundscape of the Viking night is nothing short of hypnotic. The low creak of timbers seems almost like breathing. The waves slap gently against the hull in long, slow rhythms, the heartbeat of the ocean itself. Above, ropes sway and hum against the mast. Far off, the cry of a gull echoes once, twice, fading into fog. You breathe in the salt, the dampness, the faint scent of tar and animal fur. It's rough, raw, and strangely beautiful. Records from the period suggest that Viking sailors grew so attuned to these sounds that they could tell the ship's condition just by listening. A new creak meant a loose rivet. A sharper groan meant a swelling plank. They didn't need compasses or maps when their ears could read the ship like a language. And right now that language is calm, at least for the moment. A curious fragment from seafaring lore mentions that men sometimes sang quietly to the rhythm of the waves to help them fall asleep. Not loud chants or sagas, but low hums just enough to merge with the roll of the sea. You can imagine it, a deep, steady drone threading through the darkness, one voice joining another until the ship seems to hum along. The sound would have lulled even the most restless hearts. There's an odd comfort in realizing that everything here makes noise. The ship, the sea, even the sleepers. One man snores in short bursts like a saw cutting through pine. Another breathes with a faint whistle, his nose half frozen. Someone shifts, armor clinking faintly. And beneath it all, the ocean's rhythm persists, indifferent and eternal. Some researchers argue that this constant noise could have been both soothing and maddening. Without walls to block sound, every cough, every word, every splash reached everyone's ears. Privacy didn't exist. Yet, maybe that was part of the magic. No one was ever alone. The longship was a single body, and each creak or snore was another heartbeat keeping it alive. You look toward the bow where the watchman stands, silhouetted against the grey horizon. He stamps his feet, muttering a curse at the cold. The wind catches the sound and carries it back to you, reshaped into a sigh. He's not the only one awake. Sleep comes in shifts here. Some men drift off for an hour or two, then take their turn keeping watch. You wonder what it feels like, standing guard over a ship full of sleeping warriors, knowing that silence could mean danger or peace. A peculiar little fact hides in old seafarer diaries. Some Vikings stuffed bits of moss or wool into their ears during storms to muffle the sound of howling wind. They called it sailor's silence. It wasn't perfect, but it gave their minds a thin layer of calm. You consider doing the same, though you'd miss the strange lullaby of the waves. The scholarly tide keeps shifting around the mystery of how they endured months of this sensory assault. Some think their minds adapted, turning the chaos into rhythm. Others believe exhaustion simply dulled the edges. Whatever the truth, It's certain that the sound of the sea became their most faithful companion, sometimes soothing, sometimes terrifying, but always there. The cold tightens again. Frost creeps up the edges of the ship like lacework. Someone groans softly in his sleep. You glance upward. The sail above you is furled and crusted with ice, the rope stiff as bone. Yet the ship sways with quiet confidence, slicing through the darkness like a thought half formed. You take a slow breath and let your senses drift. The salt on your tongue, the smell of wet timber, the hiss of waves, all of it merges until you can't tell where you end and the sea begins. The longship has its own voice, low and endless, and it's been singing the same song for centuries. Folklore adds a strange flourish here. It's said that the souls of lost sailors whispered through the rigging on stormy nights. Some claim to hear their names carried by the wind. Others swore the masts groaned in the language of the dead. Maybe it was just the wind twisting through ropes, but when the night is this quiet, even you might start to believe it. You close your eyes. The noises become softer now, less like chaos and more like breathing. The creak of wood fades into rhythm with your heartbeat. The world narrows to sound and sensation, and for a moment you understand why the Vikings endured this life. To them, the ocean wasn't a barrier, it was a lullaby, the sound of the world itself whispering them to sleep. When morning finally arrives, it doesn't burst over the horizon so much as seep through the clouds like weak tea. The light is dull and silvery, reflecting off patches of thin ice floating around the ship. The men stir slowly, their movements heavy with fatigue. You can hear the low clatter of wooden bowls and the creak of leather pouches opening. Breakfast, or what passes for it, begins. Most evidence points to the idea that Vikings ate sparingly during winter voyages. Food had to last, and fires were risky aboard, so they relied on meals that could be stored for months: salted fish, smoked meat, dried fruit, hard bread. The smell wafting now through the morning air is both savory and sharp, dried cod being softened with seawater in a small pot set over a shield filled with coals. It's not gourmet fare, but it's warm, and that matters more than taste. A curious little detail recorded in Norse accounts tells us that some crews seasoned their food with seaweed or crushed juniper berries. The seaweed added minerals, the juniper masked the taste of rot. You imagine the flavor a smoky bitterness, slightly resinous, the kind of thing that clings to your tongue for hours. Yet here, with the wind biting and hunger gnawing, even that tastes like comfort. You take a sip of thin barley broth passed down the line in a shared cup. It's lukewarm, thick with salt, and faintly sour. Your stomach accepts it eagerly. Around you, the men eat with quick, efficient movements, wasting nothing. A few chew-dried apples, the leathery texture pulling at their teeth. One man cracks a lump of frozen butter with his knife, shaving it onto a crust of bread so hard he must soak it first in broth. There's no conversation, just the rhythm of eating, swallowing, sighing. Archaeologists generally agree that this sort of meal wasn't just sustenance, it was ritual. Eating together anchored the crew. The act reminded them of home, of longhouse tables and family gatherings. Even at sea, far from any hearth, they mimicked that circle of community. The bowls passed from hand to hand. Each man took his share, never more, never less. That balance of fairness, of survival, was sacred. Some researchers claim that Vikings preferred to eat before sleep rather than after waking. The warmth of digestion, they said, helped ward off the chill of night. Whether that's folklore or science, no one can say for certain, but it makes sense. You can imagine them huddled after dusk, bellies full of stew and mead, feeling the glow spread through their limbs before curling into their furs. Interestingly, one unusual custom stood out in winter voyages. Crews often carried small wooden boxes filled with herbs, angelica, yarrow, thyme. They chewed the leaves not only for flavor, but to freshen the air between them. On long nights when bodies steamed under layers of wool, that faint herbal scent must have been a blessing. You can almost smell it now, a ghost of green clinging to the cold. The man beside you, grey-bearded and slow-moving, finishes his fish and carefully folds the linen that served as his napkin. Then he says a single word under his breath, maybe a name, maybe a prayer, and tucks the cloth away. Little gestures like that reveal so much. Gratitude, habit, superstition, all tangled together. Out here, every meal could be your last, so even a scrap of food demanded reverence. Some scholars remain divided on whether mead or ale was part of daily rations at sea. The sagas make it sound common, but practical evidence suggests otherwise. Liquor was heavy, and barrels took up space. Most likely, it was reserved for special nights or good omens. Imagine that rare warmth, the taste of honeyed drink spreading through your body while snow drifts across the deck. Just one gulp, and the world feels almost kind again. You glance around at the empty bowls. The men begin to settle back into routine, cleaning their eating gear with rags, rewrapping provisions. A few adjust their cloaks, preparing to row if the wind turns favorable. Others lie back, faces toward the faint sun, soaking up what little light the world offers. The ship feels almost peaceful now, heavy with full stomachs and quiet gratitude. According to the findings of maritime historians, the discipline of mealtimes mirrored military precision. The helmsman or captain determined when food was shared, and everyone obeyed. It wasn't about authority, it was about survival. If one man hoarded food or wasted rations, the entire crew paid the price. That silent understanding kept order better than any threat. As the sea murmurs beneath the hull, you close your eyes for a moment and feel the warmth of the broth still lingering in your chest. You can almost believe that the body remembers kindness the way the sea remembers sunlight. The Vikings didn't eat for pleasure, they ate to endure. And yet, in the act of endurance, they created something that looks a lot like grace. The bowls are stacked, the fire is doused. The longship sighs as it drifts onward, carrying full bellies into another endless stretch of grey water. Somewhere in the rigging, a gull cries again, sounding almost human. You lean back, letting the rhythmic sway of the sea cradle you. Hunger has been silenced for now, and sleep will come easier. Night returns, soft and starless, and you begin to understand why the Vikings saw the world as a place balanced between dream and waking. The ship is quiet again. Only the faintest hiss of the sea remains, and you can feel exhaustion curling around everyone like fog. One by one, the men slip into sleep, and their minds drift toward a realm as real to them as the ocean itself. According to written sagas and oral traditions, the Norse viewed dreams not as idle fantasy but as messages from the unseen. To sleep was to open a door between Midgard, the human world, and the realms beyond. The gods might whisper warnings, ancestors might appear with advice, or strange beasts might reveal the outcome of battles yet to come. In this world, dreams weren't passive, they were voyages of their own. A small but striking account from the Ynglinga saga describes a warrior who swore he had dreamed of Odin himself handing him a golden spear, promising victory at dawn. The next morning he was struck down before the first blow. The men retold his dream for years, not as tragedy, but as proof that the gods had claimed him with honor. You can imagine how stories like that haunted sleeping minds on cold decks, how every flicker of dreamlight might feel like a divine touch. The men around you sleep restlessly, murmuring. One tosses, muttering something about fire. Another breathes out a name, maybe a child's, maybe a god's. It's hard to tell. The air feels charged, as if invisible threads hum between these dreaming bodies. You listen, half awake, and feel something eerie, the sense that every breath here belongs to more than one world. What we firmly know is that Vikings often interpreted dreams collectively. When morning came, they would share their visions, discuss omens, and decide if the gods approved of their path. A dream of a wolf might mean an ambush. A dream of a bright river could foretell safe passage. These interpretations weren't superstition to them, they were navigation by spirit, as valid as the sunstone or the raven. One odd but charming note preserved in folklore says that sailors sometimes placed small carved figures, miniature ravens, or ships under their heads before sleeping, believing these dream guides would keep their spirits from wandering too far. You imagine the soft clack of wood beneath a cheek, the comforting thought that a tiny guardian keeps you tethered while your mind sails somewhere else. No one has quite settled the question of whether Norsemen truly believed they could travel through dreams or merely spoke of it poetically. Some scholars think these dream journeys symbolized inner battles, ways to process trauma and fear. Others argue they were literal experiences in a culture where magic and faith blurred seamlessly with life. Perhaps both are true. When you live on the edge of the known world, it's easy to believe that sleep is just another voyage. The sea itself seems to dream tonight. The waves are gentle, gliding against the hull in slow, rhythmic sighs. A mist rolls in, blurring the horizon. You can't tell where water ends and sky begins. The longship drifts, like a thought lost between worlds. You lie back, the wood cool beneath your spine, and feel your own eyes grow heavy. The rhythmic creak of the mast feels like a lullaby written by gods who pity the tired. Somewhere in that in-between space, your mind begins to wander. You see flashes, torches flickering on a snowy shore, the glint of iron, a hall glowing with golden fire. Shadows move warriors, women, perhaps ancestors. Someone is calling your name in Old Norse, though you don't understand the words. For a moment, you think you can smell smoke, hear laughter, and feel warmth far greater than the tiny oil lamp still flickering nearby. A delightful fragment from later Icelandic folklore claims that when Vikings dreamed of Valhalla, they could taste the mead of the gods on their tongues upon waking. Sweet, thick, endless. The mind's reward for surviving another night. You find yourself wondering what flavor your own dream would hold. Salt and smoke, perhaps, the taste of the sea itself. The mist thickens until you can barely see the prow's dragon head. Everything becomes a blur of silver and grey. The sea hums beneath you. The men breathe around you. You drift between wakefulness and sleep, between the real and the imagined. You start to understand how faith was not a separate part of Viking life. It was woven through every exhale, every heartbeat, every dream. The truth remains hazy, as it always does when it comes to the mind's secret voyages. But maybe that's the beauty of it. The Vikings didn't need certainty, they needed meaning. Dreams gave them that a reason to believe that even in the darkest night, some part of them was still sailing toward light. You let go. The cold air presses against your skin, but inside, you are warm. The ship rocks gently. Somewhere deep in your half-sleep, you think you hear laughter from another world, bright and distant, fading into the hush of the sea. The air thickens again with that strange quiet that comes just before danger. You wake to the sound of boots scraping against damp wood and the low murmur of voices too cautious to rise above the wind. The longship is still adrift, half shrouded in mist, and the men on night watch move like shadows, their cloaks rippling softly. You realize that sleep for a Viking was never total. It was permission borrowed from the world, never granted freely. Most evidence points to the idea that only a handful of men slept deeply at any given time. The rest drifted in and out, half alert, conditioned by years of raids and restless seas. Every voyage meant risk of enemy ships, sudden squalls, or unseen rocks beneath black water. A true night's rest was rare, a gift traded for vigilance. You sit up and glance around. At the bow, one man leans against the gunwale, peering into fog that moves like living smoke. Another grips a spear, its iron tip glinting faintly in the moonlight. The air smells of wet rope and anticipation. You sense how tightly wound they are, as if their bodies remember every ambush ever survived. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking watches were structured, if not formalized. Crews divided the night into shifts, with pairs keeping guard while others slept. Each man knew his hour. There were no bells, no clocks, only instinct and the slow rhythm of the sea. To keep awake, they whispered stories or tapped their spears softly against the deck, counting time in heartbeats. A small, surprising note from Norse folklore describes how watchmen sometimes muttered charms to see through fog. One phrase roughly translates to, "Eyes of Odin, lend me your sight." Whether it was prayer, habit, or just something to do against fear, no one can say. But as you watch the guard at the bow mouth, the words silently, it feels like faith enough to hold back the dark. Some researchers believe these night vigils forged an almost supernatural alertness. The Vikings learned to distinguish between the flap of a seabird's wings and the creak of another ship's oar. A single sound out of place could mean life or death. The discipline shaped them not only as warriors but as survivors. Even in sleep, their senses stayed tethered to the world around them. It's no coincidence that many sagas speak of dreams interrupted by sudden awakenings, a god's warning, a strange noise, a change in the wind. Life aboard demanded readiness. The mind never fully let go. You can feel that tension even now, as if the ship itself is listening with you, its wooden ribs tuned to danger. Somewhere aft, a whisper stirs. Two men argue quietly. You catch fragments. Too quiet. Fog too thick. The first insists it's nothing. The second touches the hilt of his knife, just in case. They both fall silent again, eyes on the grey curtain ahead. The sea gurgles softly around the hull, deceptive in its calm. Interestingly, one unusual tactic mentioned in medieval sources involves tossing a small log or torch into the water to test for movement. If the drift was fast, the ship was still at mercy of the current. If it barely moved, they were grounded. You see a flash of orange now as a man lowers a torch close to the waves. The light bounces, flickers, then fades. The ship is drifting but slowly. Safe enough. Still, sleep comes in cautious fragments. The men on watch take turns warming their hands near a small covered lamp, the same one from earlier nights. They sip water, stretch their backs, and exchange quiet nods. No words of complaint, no talk of fear, just silent endurance. That, perhaps, is the real definition of courage. Scholars remain divided on how they managed exhaustion. Some argue they adapted to micro-sleep cycles, resting in minutes rather than hours. Others think sheer fatigue forced the body to function beyond its limits. Either way, the result was the same. Men able to wake instantly, weapons in hand, ready to fight within breaths of dreaming. You can imagine that moment, eyes snapping open, breath steaming, the brain already calculating angles of attack before full consciousness returns. The Vikings didn't just rest on their ships. They trained themselves to be part of them, alive to every tremor. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct refined by endless danger. The fog thickens until even the dragonhead at the prow disappears. The watchmen stand motionless, every muscle taut. Somewhere far off, something splashes, maybe a seal, maybe something else. The men freeze, listening. The silence stretches, taut as rope, until the splash comes again, softer now, and vanishes into distance. They relax by degrees, shoulders dropping, the breath they were holding leaving in long white streams. You exhale too. The sound of your breath feels loud in your own ears. One of the guards glances back at you, eyes glinting beneath his hood. He doesn't speak, but the look says everything. Stay quiet, stay ready, stay alive. Then he turns back to the horizon, watching the sea like it might watch him back. You lie down again, though you know you won't sleep deeply. The creak of the hull, the whisper of wind, the faint hiss of water, they're too alive, too full of meaning. But somehow the fear becomes almost soothing. It's a rhythm you can trust. You're part of the longship's pulse now, half dream, half vigilance. As the night drags on, the mist thins just enough to reveal a pale sliver of moon. The men keep their watch, the others breathe steadily, and the ship glides onward, small and defiant in the infinite dark. For all their ferocity, you realize, the Vikings' greatest power might have been this: the ability to rest in danger without surrendering to it. The fog finally breaks with a shiver of wind that feels almost alive. You wake to a low groan from the timbers and a chorus of sighs from men who know what that sound means. The sea has changed. Overnight, the edges of the longship have begun to crust with a film of ice, glittering pale blue under the thin winter light. The water no longer slaps against the hull, it whispers, sluggish and heavy, as though thickening into glass. Archaeologists generally agree that winter voyages this far north were rare, yet not impossible. Some longships became trapped in bays or estuaries when the temperature dropped too quickly to escape. When that happened, the crew didn't abandon their vessel, they turned it into a fortress. You can almost see it happening now. Men moving methodically, knocking frost from ropes, covering the sail with tarred cloth, anchoring the ship in the forming ice like a hibernating creature. A curious detail recorded in later sagas tells of captains who carried axes made specifically for ice breaking, not weapons tools. Each morning, the crew would rise and hack a ring of water around the ship to prevent the hull from locking too tight. The rhythmic strikes must have echoed across the frozen fjord like a drumbeat announcing endurance. You climb to your feet and feel the world tilt slightly beneath you. The ice moans as it shifts, stretching across the bay in thin sheets that glitter like polished steel. Breath clouds the air in white ghosts. A few men are already at work, scraping frost from the planks. Their fingers raw and red. The sound of steel on wood is sharp but steady. No one complains. The rhythm itself is reassurance. Most evidence points to the idea that when the sea turned to ice, the ship became both shelter and prison. The crew couldn't sail, couldn't hunt at sea, and rarely dared the inland wilds where wolves and worse waited. So they lived in place, rationing food, building makeshift covers of sailcloth and furs, even stacking snow along the hull's sides to insulate against wind. You glance at the small drifts forming now white mounds, pressed against black wood. It looks strange and beautiful, like the sea has tried to swallow the ship and changed its mind halfway through. Some historians believe these frozen months tested Viking spirit more than any battle. The days grew short, the nights endless. The sun hovered weakly for hours before surrendering to darkness. Men told stories to pass the time, sharpened blades, repaired gear, and sometimes carved tiny figures from bits of bone or driftwood. These were not idle amusements, they were proof of life continuing in defiance of cold. Interestingly, one unusual adaptation described in Greenlandic tales involves using whale oil as insulation. Crews who traded in Arctic waters learned to smear it on their boots and shields to repel frost. The smell must have been unbearable, a mixture of salt and rot, but the effect was real. You wrinkle your nose just imagining it. Yet in that world, practicality always trumped comfort. The truth remains blurred among experts about how long crews could survive encased in ice. Some say a few weeks before they risked starvation. Others suggest months, depending on supplies. Excavations of coastal camps hint that ships were sometimes abandoned altogether, left to freeze solid while the men built huts nearby. It's hard to picture them leaving behind something so sacred, yet perhaps survival demanded it. You glance across the deck. Frost crystals lace every surface, oars, ropes, even the edges of sleeping furs. When the men exhale, the moisture freezes instantly, clinging like glittering feathers to their beards. They move slower now, their breath shallow, conserving strength. But there's no despair here, only endurance, that old companion of the north. One man begins to hum a slow tune, deep and rough, the kind that rolls like distant thunder. Another joins in. The sound grows until it fills the still air, vibrating softly against the ice. It isn't a song of joy, it's a chant of defiance, a reminder to the world that they are still alive. You feel it in your chest, a faint warmth blooming against the cold. A peculiar note from ship burials suggests that when a crew was trapped for too long and a man died, they often buried him in the ice itself, marking the spot with his shield. It wasn't just practicality, it was a way of returning him to the sea. The next thaw would carry him away, body and ship reunited in motion once more. You look out over the frozen expanse, and imagine those shields glinting beneath layers of frost, silent memorials to endurance. The day fades slowly. The light never brightens fully. It just changes shade from grey to blue. The men move through it like ghosts, scraping, patching, tending to ropes that no longer need tending, simply to keep their hands busy. The sound of their tools, the crackle of ice, the low hum, it all merges into a kind of music, the heartbeat of survival. You sit back down, pulling your furs tight. The cold has found its way into your bones, but the stillness outside feels almost sacred. The ship no longer travels, yet it lives, suspended between sea and land, night and day, motion and stillness. For the Vikings, this was not defeat. It was waiting a pause before the next storm, the next thaw, the next chance to sail. You close your eyes, letting the silence settle around you. Somewhere beneath the ice, the sea still moves, whispering softly against the hull. You imagine it promising spring, freedom, life. The ship creaks, answering like an old friend. And in that sound, faint and fragile, you find the pulse of an age that refused to yield. The next morning brings a silence so complete that even thought seems to move slower. You wake to a light that doesn't rise but glows faintly, like breath trapped inside a crystal. The ship is locked tight in its icy shell now. The world feels hollowed out, as if time itself has frozen with it. According to findings from preserved Norse settlements, this kind of stillness was familiar to anyone who lived through northern winters. The cold didn't just chill the body, it bent the mind. When days blurred into endless grey, people turned to stories to explain what they saw and felt. Out here on the ship, with no land in sight and no sound but the groan of the ice, you can almost hear those old tales stirring. A curious legend recorded in Icelandic folklore speaks of the frost giants walking across frozen seas, their footprints leaving cracks in the ice. The sailors said that when they heard low thunder under their ships, it wasn't the ice shifting, it was the giants moving below. You can imagine the terror of those sounds. Deep, rumbling, ancient. Out here, such stories don't feel like fantasy, they feel like truth wearing a colder mask. Most evidence points to the idea that the Vikings endured frostbite as an everyday risk. Fingers stiffened, noses burned black, and feet went numb under damp boots. Yet in the sagas, you rarely see them complain. Perhaps because they had no word for suffering that wasn't purposeful. Pain was proof of life, and endurance was virtue. Some men rubbed snow into their skin to wake the blood, a crude but effective way to prevent freezing. You try it now in your imagination, feeling the sting like fire under your palms. Scholars remain divided on how much of Norse frost lore came from experience and how much from imagination, but the overlap between the two was seamless. The aurora, for instance, wasn't just light to them, it was the reflection of Valkyrie armor, the shimmer of otherworldly warriors riding through the sky. When you tilt your head now and glimpse faint green ribbons overhead, it's easy to understand how the story took hold. The heavens really do look alive. A small but striking account from Greenlandic seafarers mentions men waking to find their beards frozen to the planks beneath them. They'd have to pour warm water when they had any just to break free. You picture that, the rough laughter, the curses, the shared helplessness that becomes humor because there's nothing else to do. Even misery becomes a form of bonding. The crew around you moves slowly, conserving energy. They chew frozen strips of fish, pass around a small flask of mead, and rub their hands together over a lamp whose flame quivers like a heartbeat. The smell of oil and smoke hangs heavy in the air. The man nearest you, his face red with windburn, grins through cracked lips and points to the frost climbing up the rigging. "The sea's growing teeth," he says in a rough accent. It's half joke, half warning. Historians have found that sailors in the far north sometimes told stories of ghostly lights dancing just above the ice-pale shapes they called Hafnsuljós, raven lights. Some thought they were souls of drowned men, others believed they were messengers from the gods. Modern science would call them reflections of ionized air, but science has no poetry. To these men, the world was alive and listening. One peculiar discovery from a burial site near Trondheim revealed amulets shaped like tiny suns, likely worn as charms against the darkness. Some think they symbolized Balder, the god of light. Others suggest they were practical symbols of summer, carried to remind men that warmth would return. You look around the deck and imagine each man with his own small charm hidden under his tunic, a quiet rebellion against despair. The hours crawl. The cold deepens until even breath feels heavy. The sea beneath the ice groans, a low vibration that travels up through the planks into your bones. It sounds like the earth itself is dreaming. The crew listens without fear. They've heard it all before. Some start murmuring softly, not in prayer exactly, but in rhythm with the sound, a hum, low and steady, as though singing back to the frozen world. Strangely enough, these long silences and superstitions may have given birth to some of the Vikings' most haunting myths. When everything around you becomes still enough to hear your own heartbeat, imagination takes over. The frost giants, the lights of Valhalla, the whispering dead, all of it becomes not just belief, but necessity. Stories keep the mind from freezing even when the body begins to fail. You pull your fur tighter. The cold bites through it easily now, sharper than before. Yet inside, something steadier has taken root, a kind of awe. You realize that survival here wasn't just about strength. It was about imagination, about finding warmth in the stories told between breaths. Every myth was a spark, every belief, a fire that refused to die. The longship sits motionless, half buried in snow, but the men aboard it are still alive, still listening. Somewhere above, the aurora flickers again, green and gold against the black. You tilt your head and let your breath fog the air, half expecting to see shapes forming in the mist. Giants, ravens, warriors. Nothing appears, and yet everything feels near. The ice groans once more, low and deep. You close your eyes, hearing it as the heartbeat of the world, and fall back into uneasy sleep. When you wake again, the light filtering through the mist feels different, warmer somehow, though the air is still bitter cold. The rhythm of the ship has changed too. You hear voices, higher and softer than the usual gravel tones of the crew. For a moment, you think you're still dreaming, until you see them. Women aboard the longship. Their presence bends the mood of the deck the way sunlight bends through smoke, gentle, unexpected, but impossible to ignore. It's well established in Norse history that women occasionally joined sea voyages. Some were merchants or healers, others were wives accompanying their husbands on long expeditions. And then there were the shield maidens, those rare warriors who defied expectation and fought alongside men. Whether their numbers were legend or truth, evidence suggests that at least a few did exist. The sagas tell of them in hushed admiration, as if bravery itself could take any shape it wished. You watch one now, her hair braided close to her head, her cloak clasped with a bronze brooch shaped like a serpent. She moves easily across the deck, handing a piece of bread to a man who's been coughing through the night. He mutters his thanks without looking up, as though still unsure if her kindness is real. She smiles faintly, then checks the bindings on a nearby crate, the motion brisk, capable, and entirely practical. A lesser-known detail from recovered artifacts suggests that women aboard longships often oversaw provisions. They measured out grain, salted fish, tended wounds, and managed the balance between hunger and hope. Their skill could mean the difference between life and starvation. You imagine the quiet authority that must have carried the kind that doesn't need shouting to be obeyed. Some researchers believe that when women joined the crew, even temporarily, the sleeping arrangements changed. Privacy became a form of courtesy. Men pulled their furs tighter, kept their jokes quieter. Perhaps they even slept more soundly, soothed by a gentler presence amid the brutal rhythm of sea life. No one has proven this, of course. The truth, like the fog over the fjord, remains elusive. One curious story from the saga of Herva tells of a warrior woman who slept with her sword across her chest, the blade wrapped in cloth so it wouldn't freeze. The men feared to disturb her. They said she dreamed of her father's ghost guarding her through the night. It's a haunting image. Strength and grief sharing one heartbeat under a fur blanket. You think of her now, somewhere in another ship, somewhere in another century, staring up at the same indifferent stars. The woman near you hums softly as she works a tune that sounds both ancient and comforting. The men seem to relax at its sound, their movements slower, less frantic. You sense how fragile morale can be in places like this. One voice, one song, one bit of warmth can steady an entire crew. The ship feels lighter somehow, as though its burden has shifted from endurance to companionship. A curious little fact tucked into Norse household archaeology reveals that spinning wheels used to twist wool into thread have been found in ship burials alongside weapons. It's as if both war and home were carried together, even in death. Maybe that's what these women represented aboard, not softness, but continuity. The reminder that life continued beyond battle, that warmth and order still had a place among the oars and axes. Historians continue to disagree about the true role of women in Viking exploration. Some argue that their presence was symbolic, tied to ritual or negotiation. Others insist they were active partners, trading, steering, and sometimes commanding ships. The evidence leans both ways, and perhaps that's fitting. The Norse world never divided strength and tenderness as cleanly as we do. A woman could weave linen one day and swing a sword the next without contradiction. The ship feels almost like a household now. A small pot of broth simmers at the center, filling the air with a scent both foreign and familiar, something like onions and herbs. A man sharpens his knife quietly. Another hums along with the woman's tune. The sea, momentarily calm, mirrors the peace above it. You realize this might be as close as these people ever come to comfort. Interestingly, one unusual ritual recorded in Danish coastal folklore speaks of women tossing dried flowers into the sea before sleep, to remind the ocean it once knew beauty. You can almost see her doing it now, scattering a handful of petals into the black water, the wind catching them and carrying their color away. Even here, surrounded by frost and fear, there is room for grace. The night creeps closer again. The temperature drops. The men retreat to their sleeping spaces, and the woman wraps herself in a heavy fur cloak, lying near the lamp to guard its flame. Her eyes close slowly, but her hand stays on the handle of a small dagger beside her. Strength, even in rest. The ship grows still. You draw your cloak tighter and close your eyes. The faint melody she hummed lingering in your head. The sea moans beneath the ice, and you realize something profound. On this frozen vessel, survival isn't just a matter of muscle or steel, it's shared humanity. A song, a meal, a story, a single kind act can be enough to keep the dark from winning. The frost thickens as night descends again, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. You wake to the faint rasp of fabric, the sound of men tugging at seams, tightening belts, and pulling hoods over their heads. The ship might as well be a frozen island now, but life aboard continues in careful ritual. You realize, half amused, that Viking survival depended as much on clothing as on courage. Archaeologists generally agree that Norse garments were brilliantly adapted to cold and wet weather. Layers were everything. The first was linen, smooth and breathable, the kind that dried quickly near a fire. Over that came heavy wool tunics, dense, water-resistant, and warm even when soaked. Then cloaks, cloaks everywhere, fastened with ornate brooches that doubled as status symbols. A chieftain's clasp might shine in bronze or silver, while a farmer's was carved from bone. Yet both men relied on the same essential truth. Fabric was armor against the elements. A curious fragment found in a Viking burial mound showed bits of rabbit fur sewn into the lining of a hood, perhaps decorative, perhaps purely practical. Either way, you can imagine the comfort of that softness against frostbitten skin. The sensation must have felt like mercy. The men around you now are wrapped head to toe. Their clothing smells of lanolin and smoke, the scent of survival itself. You pull your own cloak tighter, feeling its weight like a second skin. It's coarse, scratchy, but its warmth seeps deep into you, turning cold into something manageable. Some researchers claim the Vikings treated their garments like living things. They mended them constantly, whispered oaths over them before voyages, even blessed the thread before sewing. The sagas mention seamstresses as vital members of any household, women whose hands wove life into wool. Every stitch, in a sense, carried a prayer for safe return. You can almost see it, the flicker of firelight on a spindle, the soft murmur of a voice saying, "Stay warm, come home." Interestingly, one unusual discovery from a Norwegian glacier revealed fragments of felted wool shaped like shoe liners. They were padded with moss for insulation, layered with woven grass to absorb moisture. It's a kind of genius born from necessity, the original winter boot insert, centuries before science gave it a name. You imagine slipping your feet into such a thing, the relief immediate, the cold momentarily forgotten. Historians continue to discuss whether fur-lined cloaks were reserved for elites or worn by everyone during the harshest months. Evidence from graves suggests both. Perhaps the difference lay not in what material you had, but how well you used it. A poor man who understood layering could outlast a noble too proud to wear fox skin over wool. Pride doesn't warm fingers. Practicality does. You look at the crew and notice the variations. One man's cloak gleams faintly where oil has been rubbed into the fabric, a trick to repel water. Another has braided bits of leather along his sleeves, reinforcing them against tearing during work. A third wears a cap that looks oddly modern, tight around the head and tied under the chin. Fashion, it seems, was born from freezing nights like this. A small but fascinating note from Norse poetry describes how warriors took pride in their clothing, even in hardship. One verse from an old skaldic song boasts, "My cloak is torn, but my heart is whole." It's both defiance and comfort, proof that dignity can survive the cold. You can almost hear someone whispering that now, half joking, as he shakes snow from his shoulders. The ship creaks as the men settle down, each wrapping themselves in their layers like cocoons. The woman from the previous night sits near the lamp again, sewing something, her needle glinting faintly. She pauses now and then to blow on her fingers, warming them before continuing. You realize how much life depends on these small, repetitive acts. Every stitch, every patch, every pulled thread is a declaration that they refuse to give in. Some scholars remain divided on whether bright colors were common among seafarers or reserved for ceremonies. Yet textile analysis shows traces of madder red, indigo blue, and golden dye, even in everyday garments. So perhaps the Vikings carried color with them, deliberately, a rebellion against monotony, a reminder of sun and soil and summer. You can see a man now, his tunic faintly red beneath the grime, the hue dulled but not gone. It's a silent promise. Warmth will return. You pull the hood tighter around your face and lie back, listening to the murmur of wool against wood. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like waves slowed by ice. Around you, bodies shift, fabric rustles, and for a moment, you feel as if you're lying inside a great breathing creature made of cloth and determination. There's a lesson here, one the Vikings understood instinctively. Survival isn't only about fire and food, it's about comfort where none should exist. It's about turning fabric into fortress, thread into hope. The lamp flickers once, and you catch the shimmer of frost sparkling on every seam, each tiny glint proof that someone cared enough to mend, to plan, to live another night. You close your eyes, cocooned in the scratchy warmth of wool and fur, and feel sleep steal over you like the softest of blessings. The night deepens until it's impossible to tell where sea ends and sky begins. The world has narrowed to the creak of the longship, the muffled breathing of the crew, and the steady rhythm of work that never truly stops. Even in half sleep, the Vikings remain restless. A ship is a living thing, and living things require care even at midnight, even when the cold claws through every plank. According to written sagas and archaeological evidence, maintenance was constant. Leaks had to be sealed, ropes retied, sails checked for ice. A longship could not forgive neglect. You watch now as two men, bleary-eyed and swaying with fatigue, crouch beside a gap in the hull where frost has warped a plank. One holds a torch while the other smears tar heated in a small iron pot. The smell is sharp and heavy, filling the air with smoke that stings your eyes. A curious detail from maritime reconstructions tells us that Norse sailors made tar from pine wood, burning it slowly in clay pits until it dripped out thick and black. They called it tea gere, and it was worth almost as much as iron. On nights like this, it was lifeblood, the substance that kept the sea from claiming them. The men work in silence, fingers trembling, breath fogging. The tar hisses faintly as it meets the frozen wood, sealing the crack like a scab over a wound. One man mutters something under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. You can't tell which, but both are appropriate. In the Norse world, gods were not distant. They were companions to toil. A sailor might call on Thor for strength, or Njord for calm seas, or he might simply grumble an oath that served as both invocation and release. Language here is practical magic. Historians remain divided on whether longships carried dedicated craftsmen or if every man was expected to repair his own station. The sagas hint at both possibilities. It's likely that skill was shared, each warrior knowing just enough carpentry, sailmaking and rope work to keep the vessel afloat. That self-reliance was as essential as courage. You watch the light flicker across their faces. They move slowly, deliberately. The torch throws shadows that crawl up the ship's ribs, turning every curve of wood into a living limb. The tar smell mixes with the salt air, creating a kind of perfume of survival. It's harsh, acrid, unforgettable. A fascinating fragment from a later Icelandic chronicle describes how tar mixed with animal fat was sometimes used as makeshift balm for cracked skin. Sailors would rub it into their palms after repairs, blackening their hands but easing the pain. You can almost feel the tacky warmth, the sting followed by relief. Every remedy out here came from necessity and invention. The woman aboard, still wrapped in her fur cloak, moves quietly toward the workers, handing one of them a strip of cloth. It's linen, likely torn from her own sleeve. He presses it against the still warm patch of tar to smooth it, then nods his thanks. She retreats again to the lamp's soft glow, her face unreadable. The ship sighs, shifting slightly as if in gratitude. The men test the repair, pressing on the plank. No leak. A small victory, invisible to the world but monumental here. They exchange tired smiles, the kind that needs no words. Then they crawl back to their benches, too exhausted to even unroll their bedding. Some researchers claim that the constant creak and repair of these ships created an almost musical rhythm, the song of survival. Every task had its beat, hammering nails, tightening ropes, scraping ice. It kept the crew's spirits tethered to motion. You can hear it now, faint and steady, blending with the lull of waves beneath the ice. Interestingly, one unusual superstition found in Norse maritime lore tells of men spitting into a repaired crack after sealing it, as if offering a part of themselves to strengthen the bond. A symbolic act, small but meaningful. The body and the ship were one. Both needed tending, both deserved respect. You glance at the faint glisten of tar in the torchlight and understand the impulse it feels like caring for a friend's wound. The night stretches on. The stars, when they appear, shimmer weakly through thin clouds. Around you, the longship feels alive again. Its groans quieter, its seams healed. The air hums with the shared relief of a job done well. The men lie back down, the tar cooling to a dull sheen beside them. The woman extinguishes the torch, and the world folds into darkness once more. You can't help but think about how small acts like this, mending a crack, patching a sail, were what kept the Vikings alive far more than raids or weapons ever did. Courage isn't only in the fight, It's in the patience to fix what's broken, night after endless night. You rest your head against the deck, inhaling the heavy scent of pine and smoke. The warmth lingers faintly in the air, a fragile proof of effort. Somewhere deep below, the sea whispers approval. And as your eyes close, the rhythmic creak of the mended hull becomes a lullaby, steady, patient, eternal. The air hums with a low growl that seems to come from every direction at once. You wake to the sound of ropes straining and wood shuddering as the first gust of a storm slams into the longship. The calm you'd grown used to is gone. The world outside has turned black and violent. Wind screams across the deck like a living creature, clawing at cloaks and sails. The sea, moments ago frozen and still, comes alive with fury. Most evidence suggests that Viking longships, though agile and well-built, were vulnerable in storms. Their shallow hulls rode high on the waves, allowing quick maneuvering, but when the sea turned savage, the same lightness became perilous. You can feel it now, every swell lifting you weightless, then dropping you hard enough that your teeth rattle. The men shout, voices barely audible over the wind, hauling ropes and tightening the sail. According to ship burials and written accounts, these storms weren't rare, they were expected. Every voyage carried its share of tempests. Some captains claimed to read the weather by smell alone, sniffing the air for the sour tang of coming rain. Others trusted the gulls. When the birds flew low and silent, the sea was preparing to strike. Tonight, every omen would have screamed the same warning. One odd but striking story from the saga of Olaf Tryggvason tells of a storm so fierce that men tied themselves together with rope so no one would be swept away. Better to die bound, the saga says, than vanish alone. You imagine the weight of those ropes now, rough against frozen wrists, holding men in place as the world heaves and crashes around them. The woman aboard has taken her place near the mast, gripping it with both hands, her face pale but steady. Her lips move silently, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a spell. Vikings believed words had power, and in times like this, even the most skeptical man would whisper to the gods. A few join her, their deep voices swallowed by the wind. The deck pitches, the sea howls, and the ship feels more alive than ever. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking sails were made of wool treated with animal fat to resist water, but even the strongest weave could become heavy as stone when soaked. You hear the groan of the mast as it strains under the weight. Men grab at the ropes, their hands raw, their shoulders trembling. The smell of wet wool and salt fills the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of fear. Some researchers claim that in storms like this, crews sang to keep time with their movements. It wasn't courage, it was rhythm, a way to stay in sync when chaos struck. You hear it now, faint but real, a chant rising between the waves. It's deep, guttural, the same few syllables repeated over and over. The sound isn't loud, but it cuts through the noise like a heartbeat, steadying the men as they work. Interestingly, one peculiar note in Norse maritime tradition says that if lightning struck nearby, sailors would throw their shields flat on the deck to invite Thor's favor. Whether symbolic or desperate, it gave them something to do besides panic. You watch a man do exactly that now, his shield clattering down, the carved emblem catching the flash of lightning like a brief halo. Historians still debate how often these ships survived such nights. Some sagas exaggerate their endurance. Others admit that many never returned. The truth likely lies between myth and mathematics. Viking courage was real, but so were the limits of oak and tar. Yet as the storm howls around you, you begin to understand why legends grew from these moments. To live through this would feel like divine permission. Rain lashes your face, cold enough to sting. The sea climbs higher, waves crashing against the ship's flanks, spraying shards of icy water over everything. You cling to a bench as the deck tilts violently. The man beside you laughs a wild, fearless sound that feels part madness, part joy. He shouts something you can't hear, but his grin tells you the meaning, we're still here. Then, as quickly as it came, the storm begins to ease. The howling fades to a low moan, the rain turns to mist, and the ship steadies. The men slump against the rails, breathing hard, faces gleaming with sweat and seawater. Someone mutters, "Njord was kind tonight." Another spits over the side, a gesture of thanks to the sea for sparing them. The woman wipes her face with her sleeve, then begins checking the ropes one by one, calm, methodical, unstoppable. A small, fascinating note from maritime folklore says that, after a storm, sailors always kept a moment of silence before resting, a gesture of respect for what they had survived. You feel that now. No one speaks. Only the sound of dripping water and the soft creak of wood fills the space. The air smells cleaner, sharper, almost sweet. You realize you've been gripping the bench so tightly your fingers ache. Slowly, you release it. The ship rocks gently again, as if tired from its own rage. Around you, men collapse into uneasy sleep, their bodies swaying with the ship's rhythm. The quiet that follows feels sacred, like the aftermath of prayer. You close your eyes, the scent of salt still in your lungs, and listen to the sea smoothing itself back to calm. The Vikings called such moments the breath after thunder, the fragile peace that reminds you you're alive. And as sleep finally takes you, you feel that truth settled deep. The storm was not just weather, but a test. And tonight, the ship and every soul aboard has passed. By morning, the sea lies quiet again, slick as hammered metal beneath a pale Sunday. The storm has passed, but the ship shows its scars. Ropes hang stiff with salt, patches of ice glitter on the rails, and every man aboard moves like someone twice his age. Sleep was scarce, but they've survived, and survival deserves motion. Slowly, they row toward the nearest stretch of coast, the oars dipping into the grey water with weary rhythm. Most evidence suggests that after violent weather, Viking crews sought what they called Havenvile harbour rest. They would beach the ship in a sheltered cove or narrow fjord, haul it partly onto the shore, and turn it into a temporary home. You can feel the mood shift as land appears ahead, a jagged silhouette dusted with snow. Relief spreads through the crew like warmth. Archaeological findings from Norway and Iceland show faint impressions of such makeshift camps along coastlines, shallow pits for fires, traces of tar, fragments of bone and rope. These were the footprints of stranded sailors waiting out winter's grip. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. You can almost see it now as the longship scrapes against the frozen sand, the men leaping out, boots crunching on shore, laughter cracking the cold air for the first time in days. A curious discovery from a dig near Borgund revealed charred sections of oak that once formed part of an inverted hull. Historians believe the crew turned their ship upside down to use as a roof, propping it up with oars. You picture it, the curved belly of the vessel forming a shelter against wind and snow, smoke from a small fire curling out between the planks. Crude, yes, but brilliant, a home carved from the same thing that carried them through storms. The men work quickly, practiced in the ritual. They drag the ship onto higher ground, pack snow along the base to steady it, and hang furs across the open sides. The air smells of sweat, smoke, and pine resin. Someone starts a fire using slivers of dry wood kept hidden in waxed leather pouches. When the flame catches, a cheer goes up, not loud, just grateful. The woman aboard kneels to tend the fire, her movements sure, reverent. Archaeologists generally agree that such fires mark the psychological line between danger and safety. At sea, flame was fear. On land, it was salvation. The Vikings must have felt that shift instantly. You can feel it too, the warmth licking at your face, the sound of crackling wood mixing with the sigh of waves. After weeks of darkness and dread, the glow feels like resurrection. A lesser-known detail from Norse winter camps tells us that crews built low snow walls around their shelters to block wind. Inside, they laid branches of pine or juniper as flooring, keeping the cold ground at bay. The scent of sap filled the air, mingling with smoke and sea salt. You breathe in and understand why later travelers described Viking camps as forests reborn in frost. Some researchers think these brief respites save more lives than any battle skill. Rest, warmth, and stillness let the body remember itself. The men who fought the sea learned that sometimes the bravest act was simply to stop moving. You watch them now, crouched around the fire, drying boots, sharing the last of their dried meat. One man hums softly, the sound low and contented. For the first time in weeks, their laughter feels easy. Interestingly, one unusual artifact found at a coastal site in Denmark, a small wooden board engraved with runes, bears a message roughly translated as, "We waited, and the sea forgave us." Perhaps it was a prayer, or a diary, or both. Either way, it carries the calm of men who had learned that patience could be as powerful as strength. The night falls again, but this time it's gentler. The fire burns steady under the inverted hull, painting everything in amber light. The men sleep shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in furs, the crackle of the flames soothing them more than any lullaby. Outside, the tide whispers against the shore, a sound so faint it could be breath. You lie down beside them, watching the smoke drift upward through the gaps in the planks. The wood creaks softly above, familiar and comforting. This is not a grand hall or a feast, it's a pause in the endless motion, a fragile peace. But to these men, it must feel like paradise. As your eyes close, you think of how survival reshapes beauty. Here, comfort is not silk or wine, it's warmth, a dry cloak, and the company of those who endured the storm beside you. The fire pops once, the sea sighs again, and the longship, resting on its side like a sleeping beast, keeps watch over everyone until morning. The morning comes quietly, bringing the faint perfume of smoke and salt. The storm's memory still hangs in the air, but the sea has settled into long, glassy ripples. The men wake slowly under the shelter of the overturned hull, their breath rising in thin clouds. Someone stirs the fire, someone else hums. The mood feels lighter than it has in days, the kind of calm that makes room for music. Archaeological evidence from Norse settlements shows that the Vikings carried simple instruments on their travels. Flutes carved from bone, lyres strung with gut, and small drums covered in animal hide. Music wasn't just for feasts, it was medicine for the mind. When the world turned bleak, song brought color back to it. You can hear that now, faint and wavering, a single voice testing the air. According to skaldic tradition, sailors believed that sound itself could hold back despair. A rhythmic chant steadied oars, a soft melody calmed nerves before battle. Out here, in the silence of post-storm stillness, it becomes something gentler, a reminder that the human voice can still make beauty even when the world has nearly swallowed it. One small but fascinating account preserved in Icelandic verse tells of a sailor who sang softly to the sea to teach it patience. The words are lost to time, but the idea remains. To sing was to make peace with what could not be controlled. You can imagine it, a rough, cracked voice rising into the cold, carried off by the wind like an offering. Some scholars suggest that these songs often took the form of sagas in miniature, short verses recounting bravery, humor, or home. A man might sing of his farm, of the cow that always escaped the pen, or the girl who promised to wait but didn't. The lyrics were simple, but they kept memory alive. And memory, in the Arctic dark, was warmth. The woman from the crew sits near the fire, plucking a few taut strings stretched across a wooden frame. The melody she coaxes out is haunting minor, slow, circling back on itself like waves against a rock. The men listen without moving. No one speaks. For once, the longship's world has no need for words. The song fills the hollow beneath the hull, rising and falling like breath. Archaeologists generally agree that Norse music carried a strong rhythmic pulse, often built around work or travel. But there were softer tunes too, laments and lullabies that blurred the line between prayer and poetry. This one feels like both. The notes tremble through the cold air, landing softly on each face. You realize that this sound, fleeting as it is, might outlast everything else. Interestingly, one curious object unearthed in a burial mound in Burqa is a lyre bridge carved in the shape of a bird. Some believe it symbolized freedom, others think it was just decoration. But sitting here, listening to the woman's melody, the metaphor seems obvious. The music rises like a bird, lifting these frozen hearts above the weight of survival. Some researchers argue that singing together helped crews synchronize their emotions the same way rowing synchronized their movements. The body could rest, but the spirit needed rhythm to keep from breaking. You can sense that now, the faint tapping of fingers, the low hum of voices joining the tune one by one. The ship may be stranded, but it feels alive again. The wind outside shifts, carrying the sound across the frozen beach. Somewhere beyond the mist, it must echo against the cliffs. The Vikings probably never thought of themselves as making art, yet they understood what all humans do when faced with hardship. You make sound so the silence doesn't win. When the song ends, no one claps. They simply breathe in the quiet it leaves behind. The woman sets her lyre aside, and one of the older men begins a new chant, deep and rhythmic. It's not a song, but a story of an ancestor who rode through night seas guided by whale song, who returned home with frost in his beard and fire in his heart. The others murmur at familiar lines, some smiling, some closing their eyes. A curious insight from cognitive historians suggests that storytelling at night served the same function as shared dreaming. It bound minds together, synchronized hope. For these men, songs and tales were lifelines. Each verse stitched them tighter into a single organism, a crew that could endure almost anything so long as it endured together. The fire flickers lower. Outside, snow begins to fall again, fine and slow, flakes swirling into the open gaps of the hull. The world feels hushed, reverent, as if listening. You can almost believe that even the sea pauses to hear the last notes fade. You lean back on your rolled cloak, eyes heavy, the echo of song still vibrating faintly in your chest. The warmth of the fire mingles with the memory of melody, and for the first time in many nights, peace feels possible. The Vikings called this Huga Fritha, peace of spirit. You close your eyes and understand why. The world outside is still bitter and vast, but inside this small cocoon of music and flame, you found something even rarer than warmth, the sound of belonging. Morning brings a grey calm to the shore, but the peace is thick with the scent of salt, smoke, and something darker, the accumulated odour of survival. You stretch under your cloak and breathe it in. Tar, unwashed wool, old sweat, fish, smoke, and wet wood. To a stranger, it would smell foul. To the Vikings, it meant safety. Each scent told a story of endurance, proof that life still clung to this frozen edge of the world. Records from Norse settlements suggest that the human smell aboard a longship was legendary. Open decks, no fresh water, no soap, and weeks of damp wool created an atmosphere strong enough to make even ravens hesitate to perch. Yet the Vikings accepted it with humour. They called it the breath of the sea, as if stench itself were part of their identity. You can imagine the laughter when some poor newcomer tried to cover his nose with his cloak. A curious bit of archaeological evidence from Hedeby revealed lumps of pine resin mixed with beeswax, early attempts at deodorant perhaps. The mixture was rubbed on skin and hair, leaving behind a faint, woody sweetness. Maybe it masked the smell. Maybe it just reminded them of forests far from this salt-crusted exile. Either way, it shows that even warriors cared about small comforts. Archaeologists generally agree that cleanliness wasn't absent from Viking life, it was simply adapted. On land, they bathed weekly, often on the day named after the goddess Freya. At sea, they improvised. A bucket of seawater became a basin. A rag became a towel. It wasn't glamorous, but it was habit. The sagas mention combs, tweezers, and ear-picks found in nearly every grave. Grooming was a mark of dignity, even when surrounded by filth. You watch now as one man pulls a small wooden comb from his pouch, scraping through his thick, salted hair. Another uses the edge of his knife to clean his nails. They joke softly, pretending vanity even while their cloaks hang stiff with frost. There's defiance in that and insistence on being human when the world tries to turn you into something less. Some researchers believe that smell itself became part of their shared memory. The combination of tar, wool, and sea salt was the scent of home, of belonging to something greater than yourself. Ships carried it wherever they went. When Viking traders landed in foreign ports, locals could smell them before they saw them. It was both warning and announcement. Interestingly, one unusual discovery from shipwreck analysis found traces of juniper and birch bark in the ballast layers. Some historians think the Vikings burned these woods deliberately to fumigate the air below deck. The smoke killed insects and masked the stink for a while. You can almost see it, thin tendrils of fragrant smoke curling through the shadows, transforming foulness into something holy. The woman aboard moves through the haze, adding herbs to the fire. The smell shifts instantly, rosemary, maybe, or angelica, sharp and green. The men glance up, surprised, then grin. Someone mutters a blessing under his breath. The new aroma doesn't erase the others. It mingles with them, creating a strange, comforting perfume, half sickness, half sanctuary. Some scholars remain uncertain whether these herbs served medicinal or ritual purposes. The line between healing and worship was thin in Norse life. Burnt herbs might have been prayer offerings as easily as disinfectants. Either way, the result is the same. The air feels lighter, cleaner, more alive. A curious tale preserved in late Icelandic lore tells of a ship whose captain refused to let the crew eat or speak until they had all breathed in the scent of endurance. He'd light pine resin on a flat stone, and they'd stand around inhaling the thick, smoky air before sitting to eat. It sounds theatrical, but maybe it was wisdom disguised as ritual. To smell that air was to acknowledge their condition and endure it together. You lean back against the wood, eyes half closed. The world smells stronger now that you've noticed it, the sweetness of pine, the musk of wool, the faint tang of salt drying on your lips. It isn't pleasant, but it's grounding. It reminds you that these people lived through every sense, not just sight and sound. The cold touched their bones. The smell filled their lungs. Even taste and texture carried memory. Somewhere beyond the fire, a gull cries. The men begin to talk again, their voices low and easy. Someone passes around a piece of dried fish. Another pours a small sip of mead into the flames as offering. The smoke rises and drifts toward the sea, carrying that mingled scent of survival and gratitude. You close your eyes and breathe deeply one last time. The smell is no longer foul, it's sacred. It's the essence of life refusing to vanish in the cold. And as you drift back toward rest, that scent stays with you, wrapping around you like a cloak of smoke and memory, the purest perfume of the north. The fire has burned down to coals, glowing like buried suns beneath a skin of ash. Around it, the crew moves slowly, each man and woman carrying out the small rituals that come before rest. You sit up, your breath silver in the cold, and watch the quiet choreography unfold. There's no shouting, no order given, but every person knows what to do. The night must be made safe before sleep claims them. According to accounts preserved in Norse sagas, the Vikings were creatures of habit. Routine gave them control in a world of storms and uncertainty. Before sleeping, they performed small acts meant to ward off misfortune and invite protection from the unseen. It wasn't organized religion, it was everyday magic, woven into survival. One of the oldest Icelandic texts mentions warriors tracing small runes into the wooden beams above their heads before lying down. The marks varied: algiz for defense, sowilo for strength, Berkano for rebirth. You can almost hear the soft scrape of a knife against wood now, the whispered sound of faith in motion. To carve was to claim. A ship at sea was a fragile thing, but words carved in it could make it sacred. The woman aboard kneels by the fire, pouring a few drops of mead into the flames. The liquid hisses, sweet smoke rising to the hull's low ceiling. "For the sea," she murmurs. The others follow her lead, each flicking a crumb of food or a pinch of salt into the fire. To modernize, it's superstition. To them, it's conversation a way of saying, "We're still here." Archaeological evidence from graves and coastal camps confirms that charms and small offerings were common among seafarers. Tiny hammer pendants for Thor, shells drilled and strung as amulets, even fragments of whalebone carved with protective symbols. Some were found tucked beneath bedding, others tied to the ends of oars. The ship itself became an altar, its deck a place where gods and humans met in whispers instead of prayers. Some researchers claim that even the act of grooming was ritualized. Combing one's hair before sleep wasn't vanity, it was cleansing. It symbolized shaking off the chaos of the day. You watch a man run his comb through his long, tangled beard, muttering something low and rhythmic. It sounds almost like a lullaby, the repetition soothing both hand and heart. Interestingly, one peculiar artifact found at a Viking harbour in Roskilde shows traces of soot and crushed herbs on a flat stone, evidence of burned offerings, perhaps even incense. The mixture likely contained juniper, sage, and bits of amber. The scent must have been strong and resinous, filling the night air with a memory of summer forests. For people who spent their lives on cold, grey seas, that smell was a prayer in itself. The fire crackles softly. Someone spits into it, sealing his words with that simple gesture of respect. Another man ties a knot in a piece of cord and places it near his bedroll. You remember hearing that knots could trap bad dreams, keeping them from escaping into sleep. Whether true or not, it feels right, the tangible comfort of an action against the invisible. Scholars remain divided on how much of this behavior was truly spiritual and how much was instinctive psychology. Did the Vikings believe these acts called real protection, or did the motions themselves, repeated nightly, create the illusion of safety strong enough to make it real? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Faith at its heart is repetition turned sacred. A quiet moment passes. The woman hums a short tune under her breath. A blessing, you think. The melody is simple, circling 3 or 4 notes like a child's lullaby. The men lie down one by one, pulling their furs close, their faces soft in the firelight. The runes carved into the wood above them catch the glow and shimmer faintly, tiny constellations of intention. One curious legend from late Norse poetry says that ships that received nightly offerings breathed longer, lasting through storms that broke lesser vessels. It's tempting to believe that the care, the whispered thanks, the scratches of runes, all of it left an imprint stronger than iron. You can almost feel the ship beneath you responding, its wood warm against your palms, as if aware of their devotion. You stretch out under your own cloak. The fire sighs and settles, casting red reflections on the planks. The air smells of pine, smoke, and faint sweetness from the mead. Your eyes grow heavy. The ship creaks once, like an old friend shifting in sleep. It's easy to imagine the comfort these rituals gave. In a life ruled by wind and waves, they offered a sense of pattern, a small measure of control. You find yourself tracing your own invisible rune on the deck beside you, not because you believe in magic, but because you understand the need to. The last ember pops, a tiny spark that fades into the dark. The crew is still. Outside, the sea murmurs softly, as if answering the songs and charms. You close your eyes and let that sound carry you. In this quiet moment, where faith and fatigue are one, even gods might pause to listen. The wind has softened, and when you open your eyes, the fire is only a dim pulse of red beneath its ashes. Morning is hesitant, leaking through the cracks of the overturned hull in threads of grey light. The camp smells of damp wood and cooling tar. The men stir slowly, stretching, groaning, pulling on their cloaks. You notice how differently each body moves, some with the clumsy stiffness of youth, others with the steady, economical grace of habit. The contrast between the young and the old aboard this ship tells its own quiet story. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking crews were mixtures of generations. Boys barely out of adolescence rode beside men old enough to have seen 20 winters of raids. The older warriors, known as Gamelmand, were revered not for brute strength, but for their endurance and memory. They carried the wisdom of countless voyages, which knot held best in rain, which herb soothed frostbite, which silence meant danger. You watch one of them now, his beard white as foam, his fingers thick with old scars checking a seam in the ship's hull. He works slowly but precisely, every gesture an inheritance. Beside him, two younger men fumble with a rope, arguing under their breath. Their movements are quick but careless. The knot slips twice. The elder shakes his head, steps forward, and without a word takes the rope from them. He loops it once, twice, 3 times, and it holds. The young men grin sheepishly. "Like that," he says, his voice gravel and smoke. "It's not scolding, it's teaching. This too is survival. The passing of skill from hand to hand, generation to generation." A curious find from a Viking harbour excavation revealed carvings of names and symbols along benches, likely marks left by young sailors claiming their places. Some even scratched simple runes for luck beside older, deeper grooves that had darkened with time. It's as if every journey left a layer of history in the wood. You imagine the same thing here. Traces of lives stacked like rings in a tree, the ship itself remembering everyone who's ever slept upon it. Some researchers suggest that young warriors often saw these voyages as initiation, proof of worth before adulthood. They longed for glory, for their own verse in a saga. The older men, though, had no such illusions left. To them, travel meant trade, survival, and the quiet pride of coming home alive. You can sense that divide as they talk, the young speaking of future battles, the old reminding them that winter kills more men than war ever did. Interestingly, one unusual custom described in early Norse poetry involved apprentices serving older sailors during long nights. They'd fetch tools, patch furs, or rub frost from boots in exchange for stories. The younger ones would sit cross-legged, eyes wide, as the elders spoke of storms and strange lands of Byzantine gold, of the cold rivers of Ruse, of the endless daylight beyond the northern edge of the world. Each tale was a map drawn in words, a lesson wrapped in wonder. You glance around now and see that same ritual alive. The old man with the white beard sits near the embers, a small crowd of younger faces leaning in as he speaks. His voice is low but strong, weaving a tale about a ship that froze into the ice and drifted for months, carried by unseen currents. "We thought the gods had forgotten us," he says, eyes reflecting the firelight. "But when the ice broke, we were already home." The boys listen as if hearing prophecy. Historians continue to debate how formal Viking mentorship was, whether captains assigned apprentices, or if bonds simply formed naturally through shared hardship. Either way, those connections shaped the Norse world. The elders were walking libraries, and every word they spoke was a thread tying the next generation to memory. A peculiar little note in an old chronicle mentions that after a particularly long voyage, a young sailor would gift his mentor a token, perhaps a carved bone or a small piece of amber to mark gratitude. Many of these tokens have been found buried alongside older men, proof that knowledge was valued as much as strength. You picture such a moment now, a calloused hand offering a carved bead, an old one smiling without speaking. The woman nearby listens quietly, occasionally adding her own dry remark that makes the young men laugh. Her presence, once novelty, has become normal. Even she leans closer when the elder speaks of faraway shores. The fire cracks softly, the smell of pine smoke curling through the air. For a few moments, the frozen world outside feels far away, replaced by the warmth of shared story and age-old rhythm. The younger men eventually drift to their bedrolls, still whispering the old man's tale to each other, reshaping it already into legend. The elder sits a while longer, staring into the dying fire, his breath slow and even. You realize how much these quiet figures anchor the rest steady as the keel beneath the ship, unseen but essential. You lie back, eyes heavy. The ship creaks faintly in the night wind. Above, through the gaps in the planks, the stars gleam cold and distant. Somewhere out there waits the next voyage, the next storm, the next story, but for now, The old and young sleep side by side, equal under the same frost. You smile faintly, realizing that this balance between experience and eagerness, between memory and hope, is what kept the Viking spirit alive through every endless winter. The next day dawns bleak and colorless, the kind of morning when the cold seems to hum inside your bones. Frost blooms on every rope, and the men move stiffly as they rise. Yet it's not the weather that troubles them most, it's the creeping discomfort they can't shake. Weeks at sea and days of half rest have taken their toll. The Vikings were masters of endurance, but even they couldn't outrow the quiet enemies that shared their ship: damp, disease, and decay. Archaeological studies of ship burials reveal traces of mold spores, lice eggs, and animal hair embedded deep in the wood. It's proof that life aboard a longship was never clean. You can almost feel it now, the damp pressing up from the planks beneath your bedroll, the itchy crawl of unseen insects under the furs. The men slap at their necks, scratch their arms, and sigh in resignation. This is the cost of survival. According to preserved Norse writings, skin sores, swollen joints, and fever were common companions on voyages. The damp air gnawed at lungs, the cold turned every small wound into infection. Some ships carried herbs and salves, but more often, healing meant endurance. A sailor with a fever would sweat it out under his cloak, whispering charms to drive the sickness away. There were no doctors here, only faith, luck, and the occasional miracle. A curious artifact found at a Viking harbour in Ribe shows a small box of salve made from animal fat mixed with ash and honey. Tests revealed traces of birch bark oil, a natural antiseptic. The combination suggests that even in their rough world, they understood something of medicine. You can imagine the woman aboard kneeling beside a man whose hand has cracked and bled from the cold, dabbing the mixture onto his skin with a strip of linen torn from her sleeve. It stings, but he doesn't flinch. He simply nods, grateful. Some researchers propose that Viking sailors suffered from what we'd now call trench foot flesh, softened by weeks of moisture and cold. They might have stuffed their boots with dry grass or wool to soak the damp, but sooner or later the sea always found its way in. The smell of mildew clings to everything: cloaks, blankets, even breath. It's the scent of endurance at its limit. Interestingly, one peculiar entry in an Old Norse herbal manuscript describes a seasickness caused not by waves, but by sleep among rotting timbers. The cure, it says, is to burn juniper branches and breathe deeply of the smoke. You watch as the crew follows a similar ritual now, tossing green wood into the fire and waving the aromatic smoke through the hull. The air fills with sharp, clean sweetness. For a moment, it feels as though the ship exhales. Historians remain uncertain whether these practices truly prevented illness or simply comforted the crew, perhaps both. To believe in a cure is sometimes enough to make it real. The men begin to talk more easily as the smell thickens, joking, teasing, even laughing. The laughter sounds rough, but genuine. After days of silence and cold, it's the most human sound imaginable. A small but revealing discovery in a burial mound at Oseberg included a comb carved with runes for protection against worms of the skin. It's a grim phrase, yet it captures their reality. The Vikings faced discomfort not as complaint but as battle. To them, every ache and itch was an opponent to be conquered. You can almost hear one of them mutter now, half in jest, "Better lice than ghosts," earning a tired chuckle from his shipmates. The woman aboard checks the bedding for damp spots, turning furs and hanging cloaks near the fire to dry. Her movements are brisk, efficient, the quiet rhythm of care that keeps despair at bay. She glances toward the older man, who coughs into his hand, and pours him a cup of thin broth. He takes it without a word, but nods once, a small exchange of respect. The day passes slowly. Men clean their weapons, oil their boots, and pick at the seams of their clothing, mending what they can. One hums an off-key tune while scraping salt from a piece of leather. The sound fills the air like a reminder. Life goes on, even in discomfort, even in filth. Some scholars argue that these small acts, drying, cleaning, burning herbs, weren't just practical, they were psychological survival. The rhythm gave the crew structure, and structure kept fear away. When every day looks the same shade of grey, routine becomes the only proof that time still moves forward. You settle back as the evening darkens again, the faint scent of juniper still lingering. The fire flickers, its smoke curling upward through the cracks of the hull. Around you, men lie wrapped in their cloaks, coughing occasionally, but calm. Their breathing fills the space like the steady tide, rough, unlovely, but alive. It strikes you how thin the line is between misery and endurance, how the Vikings learned to live comfortably in discomfort. The lice, the damp, the aching joints, all of it becomes background noise, just another song in the chorus of survival. You close your eyes, scratch at an imagined itch, and think that maybe that's the truest Viking spirit of all, not conquering the world, but refusing to let it conquer you. By the time the next sun limps over the horizon, the sea is no longer frozen. The ice around the ship has cracked into great drifting plates that bump softly against the hull. The men stand on the shore, staring at the open water like wolves scenting freedom. Winter hasn't ended, but it's loosening its grip, and that means one thing: it's time to move again. Archaeologists generally agree that many Viking crews overwintered in their ships when close to trade settlements. They'd haul their longships onto the beach and build low shelters of turf and wood around them, turning vessels into homes. You can see that here the longship half buried in snow, smoke rising from a nearby pit where they've built a new fire. It's a strange sight. Something made for motion transformed into a dwelling, like a sword turned into a spoon. A curious detail found in an excavation at Kaupang revealed fragments of pottery and animal bones around the remains of a ship-shaped depression in the soil. Historians believe it marked a winter camp where a crew lived for months, cooking over open fires beside their upturned vessel. The finds included charred barley and fish bones, proof that these stranded sailors ate well when the weather allowed. Even stranded, they kept order and comfort. You watch the crew now as they adapt their longship for the long haul ashore. They patch gaps between planks with moss and clay to block drafts. They stretch bits of sailcloth across the top to create a roof. Inside, the air grows warmer from the shared breath of many bodies. Someone jokes that the ship has finally become a proper house. Laughter follows the sound of men daring to believe the worst has passed. Some researchers claim that these dockside winters fostered a different kind of camaraderie. Without constant rowing or raiding, the men turned inward to carving, trading, mending, storytelling. The rhythm of survival shifted from violence to patience. The ship became not a weapon, but a hearth. You can sense that change now. The movements are slower, gentler, deliberate. Even the sea seems to echo the new pace, its waves whispering instead of roaring. Interestingly, one peculiar find from a coastal site in northern Denmark uncovered fragments of a board game called H. a strategy game beloved by Norse sailors. The worn pieces suggest it was played often, perhaps by firelight on nights like this. You imagine two men crouched over a board scratched into a plank, moving small carved figures, muttering strategies while the others watch and place bets of dried fish or silver rings. The woman aboard has gathered a small group around her, teaching them how to repair torn seams. She speaks quietly, demonstrating with her hands, and even the most hardened warriors listen like children. Their fingers are clumsy, but their laughter is warm. You realize that work like this, mending, cooking, carving, isn't just labor. It's a bridge back to normal life. It reminds them they're still human. Some scholars argue that these winter stations along fjords were more than survival camps. They were the seeds of towns. Over time, traders, families, and craftsmen joined stranded crews, building permanent settlements that became the beating heart of Viking commerce. Places like Hedeby and Birka began just like this. A few ships, a few fires, a few people unwilling to leave. You can almost feel the beginnings of civilization here under your feet. A small but striking note from medieval chronicles says that when spring returned, the crews would bless their ship before pushing it back into the sea. They'd pour ale along the keel and whisper promises to Njord, god of the ocean. "Carry us, and we will praise you," they'd say. It wasn't mere ceremony, it was gratitude to the thing that had become both shelter and saviour. The older sailor, the one with the white beard, now stands beside the longship, running his hand along the grain of the wood. He murmurs to it softly, as if speaking to a tired friend. The woman joins him, placing her palm beside his. The gesture is wordless, reverent. They have slept beneath this hull, repaired it, trusted it with their lives. To leave it now, even for land, feels like saying goodbye to a guardian. As twilight deepens, the fire near the shore grows bright. The men gather around it, eating the last of the dried fish, passing a cup of ale between them. Their voices rise in easy conversation. Someone tells a joke so old that no one remembers its beginning, but everyone laughs anyway. The light catches on their faces, scarred, wind-burned, but alive. You lie back on the packed snow, looking up at the stars through a break in the clouds. The air is still sharp, but it smells faintly of thawing earth. The sound of water moving again fills the silence, the slow, rhythmic breathing of the world returning to life. The ship looms beside you, half home, half myth, its shadow long against the firelight. You close your eyes, thinking how strange it must feel to call this floating fortress both house and hope. The Vikings were never people of stillness, yet even they learned to rest when the sea demanded it. Maybe that's what made them endure. Not endless motion, but the wisdom to pause, to build warmth where there was none. The fire crackles, the waves sigh, and for the first time in weeks, the sound of life feels easy again. The winter air softens as the days begin to stretch, and for the first time in what feels like years, the scent of open sea returns. Meltwater runs down the sides of the longship, carving tiny rivers through the sand. The men stir with a restlessness that only sailors know. They've been still too long, and though the land has kept them alive, it has also made them dream of movement. Yet before they can return to the waves, there is one more task to finish, trading what they've earned for what they need. According to archaeological records and written sagas, Viking crews often shifted between raiding and trading depending on the season. The same men who had stormed monasteries one summer might barter furs, amber, and iron the next. You can see it happening here, the rough warriors of weeks past now carrying bundles of goods ashore, their steps measured, their weapons hidden under cloaks. The storm has been survived. Now comes the quieter, more delicate battle of commerce. A fascinating discovery at a trading site in Hedeby revealed scales small enough to fit in a palm, made of bronze and bone. The balance weights were shaped like tiny discs, each marked with runes for value. These weren't pirates. They were accountants of survival. You imagine the crew now, crouched over a table of driftwood, counting silver coins beside bundles of fur stiff with frost. Some researchers note that Viking trade was more than survival. It was adventure in its own right. The men who once sailed to plunder learned that wealth gained through exchange was cleaner, longer lasting. Yet the line between trade and raid was thin. You can see the unease on their faces as local merchants approach a mix of curiosity and caution. No one trusts easily when one's reputation is built on steel. The woman aboard acts as translator. Her voice cuts through the murmuring crowd, steady and clear. She points to a small pile of goods, bear pelts, carved bone combs, a few amber beads, and names their worth in the local tongue. The merchants nod, intrigued. Coins change hands, and the crew relaxes a little. For the first time in months, they can imagine comfort, fresh provisions, sharper tools, perhaps even a barrel of mead to warm the next cold night. Interestingly, one peculiar artifact from the Viking market at Kaupang shows an inscription scratched into a silver coin. "Sleep bought here." Historians puzzle over it, but the phrase fits perfectly. The Vikings weren't just buying goods. They were buying rest permission to stop running, if only for a few nights. You can almost see one of them clutching his coin, thinking of it as a ticket to peace. Archaeologists generally agree that trading voyages gave Vikings glimpses of a wider world. The goods they touched carried the smell of far-off lands, spices from the east, silk from Byzantium, strange resins and oils that promised warmth they'd never known. You imagine the wonder of holding such objects after weeks surrounded by nothing but ice and smoke. The crew handles each item reverently, as though the foreign texture itself were a kind of magic. Some scholars argue that trading softened the Viking spirit, teaching them to see value in patience instead of conquest. Others insist it made them more dangerous, because it gave them knowledge maps, languages, alliances. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But here, on this quiet shore, what you see is simple. Men learning that peace has its own rewards. A small, curious note from Norse law codes mentions that during trading season, violence on the docks was forbidden. To draw blood in a marketplace meant exile. Even the fiercest warriors respected that law, for it allowed commerce to thrive. You can sense that restraint now. The men move slowly, almost ceremoniously, keeping their voices low. Their swords remain sheathed, their hands busy with ropes and bundles instead of blades. The older sailor sits apart, watching the exchange with a faint smile. He's seen both sides of Viking life, the wildness of raids and the quiet power of trade. He murmurs something to the younger men beside him. Silver is a better friend than vengeance. They nod, half understanding. Youth loves danger, but age knows profit tastes sweeter. By dusk, the crew has traded enough to restock their supplies. The fire near the shore burns again, its smoke curling into the sky. They eat better tonight, smoked fish, bread still soft from the merchants' ovens, a sip of honeyed drink that warms the throat. The laughter that follows is easy, the kind that asks nothing of the gods. You lie back and watch the men counting their coins under the flickering firelight. Each piece of silver glints like a captured star, tiny rewards for weeks of frost and fear. They speak of what they'll buy when they return home, rings for wives, tools for farms, stories worth retelling. The woman smiles faintly, listening, perhaps already calculating the next voyage. The night closes in, but it's gentler now, smelling of cooked fish instead of smoke and tar. The sea whispers just beyond the dunes, inviting but patient. For now, the Vikings rest not conquerors, not exiles, but traders who have earned one quiet evening of warmth. You close your eyes and let their contentment seep into you, realizing that even these fierce wanderers dreamed of peace, of nights like this, where survival felt almost like luxury. The night after trading brings an odd quiet. The fire burns low, and the sea whispers like a voice just out of reach. You wake to find the men already stirring, their packs heavier with new goods, and their faces lighter with relief. The air feels different, less desperate, more human. Yet this calm has another sound beneath it, the mingled accents of foreign tongues. Vikings rarely sailed alone. Wherever their longships went, they met other travelers drawn by the same current of survival and curiosity. According to written accounts from travelers who encountered them, Norsemen were notorious linguists. A season of trade could fill their speech with borrowed words from the Celts, the Franks, the Slavs, even the Arabs. Language was its own form of wealth. You hear it now in fragments, the gruff rhythm of Norse softened by new tones, laughter broken by strange syllables. It's the sound of cultures meeting on cold shores, not in war, but in weary friendship. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking winter camps often became crossroads. Artifacts from one site in Dublin reveal Scandinavian tools beside Celtic jewellery and Byzantine coins. The mixture tells a story more intricate than conquest. It speaks of exchange, imitation, and shared endurance. You can imagine the scene: fires scattered along the beach, each circle of light holding people from different worlds, all telling stories to keep the dark away. A curious inscription found on a fragment of driftwood near Birka reads, "We ate, we sang. We forgot who was guest and who was host. Perhaps it was carved by a sailor who had too much mead, but the sentiment rings true. After months of storms and hunger, the distinctions between native and foreigner blur. You can see it tonight as one of the crew offers dried meat to a man wrapped in furs of unfamiliar style. The stranger accepts, smiles, and replies in a language none of the others quite know. The warmth of his tone is enough. Some researchers claim that these brief cultural encounters changed Norse life profoundly. Songs, myths, and even clothing styles shifted with every voyage. A Viking might return home, speaking new phrases, or wearing patterns borrowed from faraway weavers. Trade was not just material, it was contagious imagination. The stories followed them like echoes, reshaping the North itself. Interestingly, one peculiar artifact discovered in a gravesite near Ribe, a bronze brooch engraved with Arabic script, proves how far these influences traveled. The inscription reads, "In the name of God." Whether its wearer understood the meaning or simply admired its artistry, it speaks of curiosity stronger than fear. You wonder how many nights like this one forged small bridges across oceans of difference. Around the fire, music rises again. But this time, the tune is unfamiliar. It's a foreign rhythm, faster, playful, improvised. A few of the crew try to mimic it, clapping in uneven time. Laughter ripples through the group, the universal language of survival. The woman joins in, her hands keeping steady beat until the others catch on. Soon, strangers and shipmates sing together, the rhythm stitching them into one brief, perfect circle of sound. Some scholars argue that these moments of cultural exchange humanized the Vikings, tempering their fierce reputation. Others suggest it made them more dangerous by broadening their knowledge and ambition. Both views might be true. Understanding breeds both compassion and power. You can feel that duality in the air, the thrill of discovery laced with the awareness that this peace, like everything at sea, won't last forever. A lesser-known anecdote from the saga of Eric, the Red tells of a crew that adopted an Irish prayer for safe passage and recited it alongside their own to Njord. Two gods, one sea, the scribe wrote. It wasn't conversion, it was adaptation. When life depends on mercy, you learn to ask it from every name you know. You picture the crew now, whispering blessings in mismatched words, their faith plural but sincere. The older sailor raises his cup toward the fire, his voice carrying over the murmur of different accents. "To the sea that feeds us all," he says simply. The others lift theirs too, Viking, Celt, Slav, perhaps even a Frankish merchant with a trimmed beard and wary eyes. For a heartbeat, there are no borders here, no empires, only the sound of shared gratitude rising with the crackle of burning wood. As the fire burns lower, the strangers drift away toward their own camps, their laughter fading into the night. The crew remains behind, quieter now, each man gazing into the embers as if seeing more than flame. You feel the strange intimacy that lingers after connection, the understanding that, for one night at least, they belong to something larger than tribe or tongue. You lie back, the stars wheeling above like slow sparks from the fire. The air smells of salt and wood smoke, and somewhere beyond the dunes, a voice still sings in that foreign rhythm, faint but beautiful. You close your eyes and let it blend with the sea's sigh, thinking that perhaps this is what all journeys seek in the end, not conquest or glory, but a song shared across the cold. The next morning comes softly, pale and windless. The beach is littered with footprints from the night before, some wide and bare, others narrow and foreign, all now dusted with frost. The fire has burned itself to white ash. Around the longship, the crew moves slowly, still wrapped in the echo of music and laughter. The storm, the hunger, even the fear feel distant. What remains is something quieter, steadier, endurance polished into pride. Archaeologists generally agree that reputation was the invisible armor every Viking wore. Strength could break, but endurance became legend. The sagas praise heroes who survived more winters than they fought battles, who endured shipwrecks, disease, and endless nights. Here, on this silent shore, that spirit lingers. The men have stopped talking about raids and spoils. Now they speak of how they endured the sea, the cold, and the long sleep of ice. A curious find in a Swedish burial mound revealed a carved bone amulet etched with the words, "The cold bowed to me." Perhaps it was a boast, perhaps a prayer, but it captures something essential. Survival wasn't mere luck, it was victory, and victory was sacred. You can imagine one of these men whispering the same phrase as he tightens his belt against the morning chill. Some researchers suggest that this reverence for endurance shaped the Viking worldview itself. Their gods were not immortal in the usual sense. Even Odin was fated to die at Ragnarok. Yet that knowledge didn't weaken faith, it strengthened it. If even gods could meet their end with courage, then so could men. To last one more day was to honor that cosmic defiance. The crew goes about its morning in silence. The woman feeds the fire, the younger sailors gather driftwood, the older man checks the ship's hull. There is no hurry, no complaint. Their movements are slow, deliberate, confident. They've learned patience, the kind that comes only after you've seen the sea take everything but your will. Interestingly, one peculiar inscription found on a runestone near Uppsala reads, "He did not fall, he simply stayed." Historians debate its meaning. Was it carved for a soldier, a sailor, or someone who simply survived too many winters to be forgotten? Whatever its origin, it feels true here. To stay alive was the purest kind of bravery. A curious but often overlooked custom among longship crews was the ritual of silence after hardship. For one full hour after a storm or a battle, no one would speak. It wasn't superstition, it was reflection. The silence honored both fear and gratitude, acknowledging that survival carried weight. You sense that same unspoken reverence in the air now. The men work without words, the sound of oars and ropes replacing conversation. Some scholars think this stoic pride gave rise to the Viking phrase, cold glory, the quiet satisfaction of endurance without witnesses. It wasn't the loud triumph of victory, but the inward warmth of still being here when the world expected you gone. You see it in their faces now, eyes squinting into the grey horizon, lips curved in half, smiles that say, "We outlasted it." The older sailor finishes checking the ropes and stands back. His shoulders sag, but his eyes shine. "Good wood," he says simply, patting the side of the ship. "Still breathes." The others nod. They know what he means. The ship has survived too, scarred but faithful. Its creaks sound almost like sighs of contentment, a vessel that has learned, like its crew, the art of endurance. One of the younger men begins to speak softly, almost to himself, reciting a few lines from an old verse. The words, rough and rhythmic, drift through the air. The frost takes kings and beggars the same, but the heart that beats through winter rains. The others listen in silence. The words settle over them like snow, thin but lasting. According to studies of Viking oral tradition, these short verses, half poem, half proverb, were a way of carrying wisdom without writing it down. Each line held truth compacted into rhythm. You can hear the comfort in it. No boasting, no despair, only the steady promise that strength is measured by survival, not conquest. The woman smiles faintly at the verse, tossing another piece of wood onto the fire. Sparks leap upward, brief and bright. For a moment, they look like stars caught too close to earth. As the day fades, the men sit by the fire again, sharpening blades, checking gear. But there's no urgency now. Their work feels ceremonial, as if sharpening memory instead of weapons. You realize that what they seek isn't just the next voyage, it's the quiet prestige of endurance itself. Every scar, every frostbitten fingertip, every cracked nail tells a story worth more than silver. Night comes early, painting the world in shades of steel. The fire's warmth feels deeper tonight, earned rather than borrowed. Around it, faces glow faintly gold in the gloom. They've learned something that only hardship can teach. that survival isn't luck or strength alone, it's the will to keep breathing when everything else stops. You close your eyes and listen to the gentle rhythm of the sea returning to life, the longship creaking softly beside the fire. These people, who have lived half their lives on water and half in cold, have found something rare: peace born of exhaustion, pride born of persistence. The sound of waves mingles with the crackle of flame, and together they whisper the same quiet truth: to endure is to triumph. By the next morning, the air carries the faintest smell of thawing soil. The ice at the water's edge groans and breaks apart like old glass. The crew gathers in silence, each man squinting toward the horizon where mist still clings to the sea. It is time to leave. The woman's voice cuts through the cold. We sail when the tide rises. Simple words, but they carry the weight of months of waiting. Archaeologists generally agree that preparing a longship for departure after winter required nearly as much care as its construction. The sea was no place for impatience. You watch as the men move through the rituals of readiness. They scrape frost from the planks, reapply tar, and tighten every rope. The smell of pine resin and smoke fills the air again. Each movement feels reverent, as if they're waking a sleeping creature rather than repairing a tool. A curious find in a shipyard excavation at Roskilde uncovered fragments of worn oak beams coated in layers of soot and oil. Scholars believe they were seasoned by repeated heating and cooling, giving them resilience against the sea. The process, though simple, demanded patience and precision, the same qualities that defined the people who built and sailed them. Watching the crew now, you sense that same devotion. Some researchers say that the Vikings treated their ships almost like living beings, giving them names and speaking to them before voyages. Sagas mention vessels like Ormur-in-Langi, the Long Serpent, and Elida, the Swift One. These weren't metaphors but relationships. You can see it now as the older man places his hand on the dragon-headed prow and murmurs something you cannot hear. The gesture is gentle, grateful, almost affectionate. The woman checks the supplies with careful eyes. Barrels of dried fish, bags of barley, coils of rope, oil for lamps. Each item is a promise of endurance. The younger men test the oars, their shoulders straining with the familiar weight. Even after months ashore, the rhythm returns easily. The sea has shaped their muscles, and memory does the rest. Interestingly, one peculiar artifact found near Trondheim, a small wooden token carved with wave-like patterns, was believed to be a charm for calm seas. Some historians think sailors tossed such charms into the water before departure, trusting that the ocean would remember the kindness. You see a similar act now as one of the younger men breaks a piece of bread, tosses it into the waves, and whispers, "For luck." The others follow suit, smiling. Historians remain divided on whether these gestures were superstition or ceremony. Perhaps both. When you've spent half your life battling the sea, a little reverence feels like wisdom. The ocean is not an enemy to conquer, but a force to negotiate with. You can feel that unspoken respect now, as the tide begins to rise, pushing against the hull like an eager companion. The longship shifts slightly, its timbers creaking. The sound draws a hush over the crew. They push together, shoulders straining, boots digging into the wet sand. Slowly, the vessel slides forward, meeting the water with a splash that sounds almost joyful. The older man laughs, and the tension breaks. A cheer goes up, quiet but full of relief. A curious account from the saga of the Greenlanders describes how sailors would speak to their ship as if to a friend returning from sleep. "Wake now, wave runner. The road is calling." The phrase feels perfect here. The longship seems to wake indeed, rocking gently, remembering its purpose. It no longer looks like a shelter or a relic, it looks alive again. The woman climbs aboard first, steadying herself with practiced grace. The others follow, one by one, until the deck is full again. Their faces are thinner, older, but their eyes burn bright. The sea waits before them, grey and endless. The oars dip into the water, and the sound of rowing begins the steady, rhythmic heartbeat that once defined their lives. Archaeologists generally agree that Viking navigation relied on more than stars and instinct. They used sunstones to locate sunlight through clouds, seabirds to judge distance from land, and even the color of the waves to read depth. You picture one of them holding a crystal to the sky, tilting it until a line of hidden light appears and saying, "There, that's home." The shoreline fades behind them, a blur of snow and stone. The air grows sharper, but the rhythm of the oars keeps them warm. The older man stands at the helm, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Beside him, the woman hums softly, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a song of farewell. The others row in silence, their breath rising and falling like smoke from unseen fires. As the land slips away, you realize that what they're leaving isn't just a camp, but a season of themselves. The months of stillness, the hunger, the stories, the laughter, all of it becomes memory. The sea ahead is both promise and peril, but it's also freedom. Every pull of the oars draws them further from the frozen world they conquered by simply enduring. You lie back against the deck, the sky stretching endless above. The salt air stings your lips. The ship rocks gently, and for a moment you feel part of something ancient and infinite. The longship glides forward, carving its path through the cold, unbroken water. Ahead waits spring, and beyond that, whatever stories the next shore will hold. The sea greets them with silence. No storm, no wind, just the soft hiss of oars cutting through grey water. For the first time in months, the longship moves freely again. The men row in rhythm, their breath rising in white clouds that vanish into the mist. Each dip of the oar feels like a heartbeat, steady and patient. They do not rush. After so long trapped in stillness, motion itself feels like a kind of prayer. According to records from later Norse accounts, voyages after winter often began quietly. There were no war cries, no songs of conquest. The crew would row for hours without a word, relearning the sound of the sea. You can hear that sound now, the creak of wood, the soft slap of water, the faint rasp of breath. It's hypnotic, pulling you into the same slow trance the rowers share. Archaeologists generally agree that longships were built to move with the sea, not against it. Their flexible planks bent with each wave instead of fighting it, which made them faster and safer in heavy weather. The sensation must have been strange, to feel the ship ripple beneath your feet like a living creature. You feel it now, the hull flexing gently as if sighing, adjusting, remembering the rhythm of its old life. A curious note from an Icelandic saga describes how crews believed that their ships had moods. Some mornings the vessel would glide smoothly, responding like a well-trained horse. Other days it would resist every pull of the oar. When that happened, they said, the ship dreams of land. Perhaps it was superstition, but it speaks to a truth the Vikings understood, that all things, even wood and rope, carry spirit. The woman sits near the mast, her hands clasped loosely around her knees. She watches the water with calm eyes. The older sailor stands at the tiller, guiding them through the mist with the ease of someone who has trusted this same current many times before. Around them, the younger men row without complaint. There's peace in their faces, the kind that comes from exhaustion turned to rhythm. Interestingly, one peculiar artifact discovered in a burial near Gotland is a small bronze plaque depicting a ship surrounded by waves shaped like serpents. Some historians think it represents the Viking belief that travel across the sea mirrored the passage between worlds. Each voyage, in a sense, was a journey through life and death. You can feel that solemnity now, the sense that rowing is not just movement but meaning. Some researchers suggest that this meditative rhythm helped the crew endure the endless grey days of sailing. They called it rowing sleep, a trance, like focus where body and mind drift apart, one moving while the other dreams. You sense that happening here. The men's faces blank but peaceful, eyes half-lidded as their arms keep perfect time. The sound becomes everything, the oars entering and leaving the water, the faint groan of the mast, the heartbeat of endurance. The older man hums softly, and without being told, the others match his tone. It's not quite song, not quite chant, just a low sound that fills the air like warmth. The ship seems to move more easily when they do it, the rhythm smoother. It's as if the ocean itself listens and answers. You realize that this sound, the blending of voices and sea, is the truest Viking language, the one spoken without words. Historians often remark that Norse sailors read the sea the way poets read silence. The tilt of the waves, the feel of wind on their cheeks, even the taste of salt on the air, told them where they were. You see it now as the helmsman raises his head, tasting the wind before speaking. East. The single word carries certainty, no compass needed. The body remembers what the mind does not. A curious tradition from Greenlandic voyages involved throwing a piece of silver into the sea when the first gull appeared after winter. The offering was to thank the gods for returning the world's movement. You see the same now as one of the younger men pulls a coin from his pouch, kisses it, and flicks it into the waves. The sound is soft, swallowed instantly. The gesture feels like promise. We will not waste this freedom. The mist begins to thin. The horizon brightens into pale gold, the first real sunlight in what feels like forever. It spills across the ship's deck, lighting up frost crystals that glitter like jewels. The men blink, their faces softening in the warmth. The woman lifts her head toward the light and smiles, eyes closed. For a brief moment, the entire crew seems to breathe together, the same quiet sigh of relief. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cries. The first one since the ice broke. The sound slices through the calm like a blessing. The older man nods once, the corners of his mouth twitching into a small, private smile. "We're home to the world again," he says quietly. The others murmur their agreement, too tired for cheer, too wise for disbelief. The ship glides onward, cutting through sunlight that turns the sea to glass. You lie back, watching clouds drift like ghosts above. The water below mirrors them so perfectly it's hard to tell which way is sky and which is ocean. The rhythm of the oars continues, steady and patient, a song without beginning or end. And as you drift towards sleep again, rocked by that same endless rhythm, you realize what the Vikings must have always known, that peace is not the absence of danger, but the moment you learn to move within it. The sea is still cold, the world still vast, but for now, the longship floats like a heart at rest, alive, awake, and endlessly travelling. The light fades slowly that evening, turning the sea from silver to violet. The air feels cleaner now, almost soft. You hear laughter ripple across the deck for the first time in days. Someone starts humming a familiar tune, the kind sung around hearths and halls instead of battlefields. The sound feels fragile, like the world itself is exhaling. According to the oldest Icelandic sagas, the Vikings believed twilight belonged to spirits, a brief time when both gods and ancestors could listen. At sea, the crew would often grow quiet at dusk, lowering their voices out of respect. Yet tonight, silence doesn't mean fear. It feels more like reverence. The men speak softly, their words slow and careful, as though they're aware that this gentle hour doesn't come often. Archaeologists generally agree that Norse sailors treated evening as the sacred pause of the day. Before sleeping, they would share food, mend gear, and tell stories by lamplight. The light of fire or oil became a bridge between the waking world and the dream one. You can see that now, the small flame flickering in a bronze cup, its reflection quivering across their faces as they settle into stillness. A curious find from a burial mound near Aarhus contained a bronze lamp engraved with two intertwined serpents. It still held traces of whale oil inside. Perhaps it was a sailor's companion, burning through endless nights at sea. The imagery of serpents likely symbolized cycles, life swallowing death, darkness returning to light. Watching the flame tremble now, you understand the comfort it must have given. The woman sits beside the fire, her face caught in the glow. She holds a scrap of cloth, mending a tear in her cloak. The needle moves steadily, catching the light with each pass. Around her, The men talk in murmurs. One tells a story about his brother, lost years ago in a storm. Another remembers a summer raid gone wrong but survived. The stories are small, but their telling feels monumental. Every word is proof that they've outlived something. Some researchers suggest that storytelling at sea wasn't merely entertainment but a form of survival. Each tale carried instruction what to do when ice trapped your ship, which wind to trust near the Shetlands, which harbour offered mercy. Stories preserved experience long after maps faded. You can hear that intent in their tone now. The younger men lean in, eyes half closed, letting the voices guide them into the rhythm of memory. Interestingly, one peculiar tablet found in a Norwegian ship burial bears carvings of runes that translate roughly to words against the dark. Scholars believe it may have been a charm recited before sleeping. The phrase fits the mood perfectly. Out here, words are light. Even the smallest story pushes back the edges of the endless Black Sea. The older man finishes his tale and stares into the flame. He died with laughter, he says softly, so the sea couldn't take his voice. The others nod, smiling faintly. For a few moments, no one speaks. The longship rocks gently, the water whispering like something half alive. In that quiet, you sense how deeply these people understood mortality not as tragedy but as rhythm. Every loss became part of the song. Some scholars argue that this acceptance of death made Norse culture uniquely resilient. They didn't see endings as failures, but as returns. To die at sea was to go home to the world's first mother, the ocean that gave birth to everything. Perhaps that's why their songs are both sorrowful and calm, like waves that never stop breaking. The woman finishes sewing and folds the cloak over her lap. Stories keep us warm, she says simply, her voice low but steady. Better than fire. No one disagrees, they all understand. The flame might die, but a story lingers, wrapping around the heart like a blanket. A small but evocative passage in the saga of Helgi the Lean describes a crew telling tales through the night while their ship was locked in ice. They spoke until words became dreams, the scribe wrote. You can feel that transformation now. The men's voices slow, their sentences stretching, merging with the rhythm of waves. Some begin to drift into sleep mid-conversation, still smiling faintly. The lamp sputters, its oil nearly gone. The woman shields it with her hand, then lets it fade. Darkness folds around them, soft and complete. Only the faint light of stars remains, shimmering on the water like scattered silver. The sea hums quietly beneath the ship, the same eternal note it's been singing since the beginning of time. You lie back, eyes open to the sky, the sound of breathing and water blending together. The stories echo faintly in your head, already blurring into dreams. You think of how strange it is that these fierce wanderers, who faced storms and blood and ice, found their truest peace in the telling of small human things. Maybe that's the heart of it. They weren't only conquerors, they were keepers of memory, caretakers of silence, singers in the dark. As you drift toward sleep, the sea sighs again. The ship creaks, and you understand that everything stories, journeys, lives exists for a little while in the same rhythm. The flame has gone out, but its warmth lingers, invisible and unbroken. When dawn returns, it arrives quietly, with a silver line at the edge of the world. The ship drifts in calm water, its reflection trembling with each small ripple. The men wake slowly, stretching under their furs, faces pale but peaceful. The woman is already awake, sitting near the prow with her cloak drawn close, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Something about her stillness feels like ritual. The light touches her face and turns it golden. According to Norse belief, dawn was sacred to the goddess Delingra, bringer of day and renewal. Sailors often greeted sunrise with silence, watching for omens in the colors of the sky. You can feel that reverence now. No one speaks. The sea mirrors the faint pink glow overhead, and for a moment, it looks as though the whole world is breathing again after a long sleep. Archaeological studies of Viking ritual objects suggest that morning light held special importance for travelers. Small amber pendants, shaped like suns, were found in ship burials, likely meant to carry daylight into the next world. You imagine how comforting that idea must have been, to believe that even after death, the morning would find you. The older sailor lifts a small wooden bowl of water, its surface trembling in his hands. He holds it toward the sun and then drinks. The others follow, taking turns. It's not just thirst, it's ceremony. To drink at dawn meant to accept another day. You can see how deeply this ritual ties them to both time and place, how it turns something as ordinary as water into communion. Some researchers suggest that rituals like these helped the Vikings maintain emotional balance through hardship. The sea could erase a man's sense of time, but small repeated gestures anchored him to rhythm and meaning. You can sense that balance now in every movement, the deliberate way they roll their furs, pack their gear, adjust the sail. Life for them has become an art of precision, each act a way to keep despair at bay. A curious note from a 10th century monk who met Norse sailors on a Baltic shore records that they prayed with their eyes. He meant that they gazed at the sunrise, unmoving, as if seeing something invisible to others. Perhaps he misunderstood. Perhaps they simply understood that silence could be a kind of faith. The woman stands and moves to the center of the deck. She reaches into her pouch and scatters a handful of dried herbs onto the sea. The smell rises instantly, sharp, sweet, and strange. Juniper, maybe, or sage. The smoke drifts across the deck and wraps around the men's faces. One of them closes his eyes and whispers, "For safe return." Interestingly, one peculiar find from the island of Gotland revealed a small clay bowl containing ash and charred herbs buried beneath the keel of a longship. Historians believe it was part of a blessing for journeys. The symbolism is beautiful. Fire beneath water, protection born from both elements. You can almost imagine that same invisible fire burning quietly beneath this ship now, unseen but present. The sun climbs higher. The sea glitters. The men begin to row again, their oars dipping in perfect rhythm. Each stroke looks effortless, but you can see the strain in their shoulders, the quiet grit behind the harmony. They are creatures of motion once more, their bodies and ship moving as one. The sound of oars echoes like a heartbeat across the still water. Some scholars have described the Viking approach to travel as a form of meditation, the body working in repetition until thought dissolves into rhythm. You feel that now, the quiet merging of sound and breath, wood and water, strength and surrender. It's as if the entire crew has slipped into the same slow dream, carried not just by wind and tide, but by something deeper. The older man looks up, eyes scanning the horizon. "Land soon," he murmurs. The woman nods, and a faint smile touches her face. The younger men straighten, their fatigue easing at the promise of ground. The sea ahead looks different now, brighter, speckled with sunlight. Even the waves seem gentler, as if guiding them toward rest. A small, lovely detail from Norse travel poems says that sailors could smell land before they saw it, the faint sweetness of earth carried on the breeze. You breathe in deeply and catch it too, a hint of pine and damp soil, the perfume of something alive. After weeks of salt and frost, the scent feels miraculous. The men row harder now. The rhythm quickens, echoing off the water. The ship glides faster, the prow slicing through sunlight. The woman grips the side rail, her eyes fixed ahead. The older man laughs, a sound deep and unguarded, and for the first time you hear joy in their voices, pure, uncomplicated joy. The faint shape of coastline appears at last, rising out of mist. The men shout, their exhaustion forgotten. They have returned to the world of roots and fire, to solid ground. The ship surges forward, as if it too longs for rest. The oars lift one last time, glittering with drops of gold light. You lie back, watching the sky grow wide and blue above them. The longship, scarred and weathered, glides toward shore, and for a brief moment, it looks weightless, as if the sea itself carries it home like a promise kept. You can almost hear the whisper of gods and ancestors in the wind, welcoming them back with pride. The tide swells beneath you, the air sweetens, and the world, after so many frozen nights, finally feels kind again. The longship touches the shallows with a soft hiss, its keel brushing sand for the first time in months. The sound is almost tender. The crew exhales as one, a deep sigh that carries relief, disbelief, and gratitude. The woman steps into the cold water first, steadying herself, and the rest follow. Their boots sink into wet sand. The world feels solid again beneath their feet. According to Norse chroniclers, the return from a voyage was treated as both ending and rebirth. Every man who set foot on land after months at sea was symbolically newborn, cleansed by hardship and reclaimed by the earth. You can sense that feeling now. They look around as though seeing colour for the first time. The grey of the sky suddenly soft, the green of distant grass almost painful in its brightness. Archaeological studies from coastal settlements show evidence of feast fires built beside returning ships, charred animal bones, broken drinking horns, fragments of decorated pottery. Those were the marks of welcome, of survival, celebrated with food and story. You imagine this crew will do the same soon. Roast meat, share ale, and speak of ice and storms until the sea becomes legend again. The older sailor kneels and presses his palm to the sand. His lips move soundlessly, but the reverence is unmistakable. He is thanking the land for receiving them. The woman stands beside him, her eyes glimmering in the thin sunlight. She looks not triumphant but at peace. This journey has not been conquest. It has been a test of belonging, and they have passed. Some researchers propose that the Vikings' bond with nature was not dominance but dialogue. They endured by listening to wind, to waves, to the language of seasons. You can see that truth now in how they move. Quietly, reverently, their steps slow and deliberate as they haul supplies ashore. The ship creaks behind them, as if sighing in relief. It too has earned its rest. A curious find from a burial near Stavanger included a small carved token shaped like a sleeping ship. Scholars think it was placed there to honor a vessel that had finished its last voyage. The idea is touching. Ships, like people, had souls that needed peace. You glance back at this longship, half resting in the tide, and imagine it dreaming of open seas. Historians continue to debate whether the Vikings feared the end of a journey or longed for it. Their myths speak of eternal voyages, of ships sailing forever in the afterlife. Yet here, in this quiet moment of landing, you feel that mortality was never an enemy to them. It was simply another horizon. They met it as they met everything, face forward, eyes open, steady. The men begin to laugh again, but softly this time. One tosses a pebble into the surf, another kneels to scoop a handful of wet sand, letting it fall between his fingers. These gestures are small but profound. The physical act of returning, the tactile proof that they exist in the world again. The woman takes out a small pouch, removes a pinch of ash, and scatters it over the water. The grey dust swirls, then vanishes into the tide. It's likely the remains of a fallen comrade or a ritual offering. Either way, it's a goodbye to winter, to hardship, to everything the sea demanded of them. The sun climbs higher, thin and white. The crew begins to build a small fire near the dunes. They don't speak much now. There's no need. Words belong to the voyage, but silence belongs to the return. The firelight flickers on their faces, and you notice how time has reshaped them. They look older, yes, but also lighter, their burdens melted into calm. Interestingly, one peculiar phrase from an old poem found in the Codex Regius reads, "A man who sleeps after the sea sleeps twice." Scholars interpret it to mean that rest feels deeper once the waves no longer rock you. You can see the truth in that as the men stretch out beside the fire, their eyes closing, the sound of waves soothing rather than warning. The longship rests half in water, half on land, caught between two worlds, its journey complete, yet not forgotten. You realize how fitting that is. For the Vikings, life itself was a voyage, each hardship a tide that shaped them. They didn't seek comfort, only meaning, and they found it in endurance. As twilight falls, the fire burns low. The woman hums again, that same lullaby she sang months ago beneath the frozen hull. The sound drifts across the sand, mingling with the slow breath of the sea. The older sailor's head nods, then stills. The others follow, one by one, slipping into sleep as gently as the tide. The wind softens, the sea hushes. Above them the stars gather in quiet constellations, ancient and watching. You lie still, listening to the steady rhythm of waves and breathing. The world feels vast yet close, cold yet tender. And as the last spark of the fire fades, you understand what these warriors have known all along. That home is not a place, but a moment, this one, here, between exhaustion and peace, between the memory of storms and the promise of morning. The longship rests, the sea dreams, the night deepens. You close your eyes and let that calm fill you completely. The journey is done. Now the story slows, and the sea grows quiet again. The waves lap softly, their rhythm easing into the hush of sleep. You can still hear the faint creak of the longship in your mind, but it's gentler now, like a cradle rocking far away. Imagine the smell of salt giving way to earth, the cold giving way to warmth, the endless horizon narrowing into the comfort of rest. You picture the crew asleep by the dying fire, their faces calm at last. The woman's song lingers in the air like a heartbeat fading into distance. Even the ship seems to dream beside them, its planks warm from the sun that has already set. Everything that moved is now still, and in that stillness, there is peace. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the waves, slow, easy, in and out. The storm has passed, the ice has melted, you are safe. You can almost feel the weight of fur around your shoulders, the faint warmth of the fire on your cheek, the whisper of night pressing close. The world around you fades into softness, the stars above, the sigh of the wind, the deep, patient sound of the sea turning in its sleep. Every sound folds into quiet, every motion into calm. And as the last light of the fire disappears, so do the voices of the ship. The journey is complete, but its memory stays with you like the taste of salt on your lips, a promise that you have crossed the cold and come out whole. Rest now. Let the sea fade. Let the ship drift into your dreams.